that's one where the officer will put the motion, so you can, whoever's going to just move it can just move it rather than having to read it out. It's only really for the confidential items that we end up having to read it all through.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry for the, yeah.
John's not going to be here.
Oh, yeah. But I think so. So you know, it's something like, you know, so we have an officer's recommend, you know, after there's been questions, etc. So we have an officer's recommendation. Does anyone?
And then the officer has to read that
Well,
out.
they will. Liz will have already presented it. So as you step through, Liz will have already presented that that item. So I don't think it's she will touch on the recommendation.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, fellow councillors and officers of the East Gippsland Shire. Firstly, I'd like to thank people in the gallery here that have turned up today, and also to say that we are very pleased to be here today to hold our ordinary council meeting in the Orbost chamber. Now, I'd like to read that the East Gippsland Shire live streams, records and publishes its meetings via webcasting to enhance the accessibility of its meetings to the broader East Gippsland community. These recordings are also archived and available for viewing by the public or used for publicity or information purposes. At the appropriate times during the meeting, any members of the gallery who are addressing council will have their image, comments or submissions recorded. No other person has the right to record council meetings unless approval has been granted by the chair. Please ensure that your mobile phones and other electronic devices are turned off or in silent mode for the duration of the meeting. Councillors, I would like to remind you to make sure that your microphone is turned on when you're addressing the gallery. Members of the public wishing to speak, we will ensure that the microphone is turned on for you. Thank you. So, in beginning the meeting, on behalf of Council, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting and pay my respects to their elders past and present and the elders from other communities who may be here today. So, Mr CEO, could I please ask if you have any apologies for today's meeting? Thank you.
Through you, Mr Mayor, thank you. We have one apology from Councillor Joe Rotino.
Thank you for that. And next, any declarations of conflict of interest?
Mr Mayor, I have one declaration of a conflict of interest, of which is yourself, which is for item 5.1.4.
Thank you for that. All right, councillors, we have the confirmation of minutes from our ordinary council meeting, our special council meeting and our statutory council meeting. So could I please have a mover for that?
I'm happy to move that for you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. A seconder, Councillor Natalie O'Connell. Thank you. All those in favour, please. That is 7-1. Councillor Roberts. Thank you for that. Thank you very much. Our next council meeting will be on Tuesday the 17th of December 2019 to be held at the Corporate Centre at 273 Main Street, Bensdale, commencing at 6 p.m. Do we have any requests for leave of absence?
Through you, Mr Mayor, no, there are no requests for leave of absence.
Thank you. Before we move to our request to speak, at the moment I have a certificate here for the Orbost Fire Brigade, and I would please ask Captain Dick Johnson to come forward, please. Just before giving this award to yourself and the brigade for 100 years of service, I would like to just to point out, and I'm certain that many people in this room would know, but CFA volunteers and their trucks have left our region this week in support of New South Wales in their times of absolute crisis. And it's a commendation to the volunteers that they would give up their time, and it's a commendation to the employers who allow their staff to go and fully paid to support other communities as we have been supported in the past. So I tip my hat, and to councillors also, that our volunteers are doing this for other people a long way from home. So I say thank you to them. But 100 years of CFA in Orbost, that's quite a milestone. Obviously you would have had countless members in that time, and volunteers, they're the backbone of communities, and your service is there to help in times of crisis, and it can be many things, from a fire to unfortunately say an accident out here on the highway or on one of your local roads that you attend and serve the people. So I hope that everyone in the brigade enjoys their celebration on Saturday. Unfortunately, I can't attend. I think I'm triple booked on Saturday. But to you, Dick, on behalf of your brigade, thank you very much for your service, and please take this.
Thank you very much. Just on behalf of the Orbost Fire Brigade, we certainly would like to thank you for this. Thanks to councillors. You know, we work together with council and a lot of stuff with fire and rescue and everything. So, yeah, it's 100 years. It's a lot of water's gone on the bridge, I suppose you could say, but yeah.
They need more.
A bit more water. Water's been all right, yeah. But we certainly changed over the years. We're not just fire anymore. We are fire and rescue, you know, and we do heart attacks and all that. So that's part because we're a medical response team. So. Yeah, we can do a bit of everything. So, you know, once again, thank you very, very much.
Keep up the good work. Now, item 1.7 is a request to speak about our community project to save the Snowy River Rail Bridge Incorporated, and I think we have in attendance Mr Gary Squires, a committee member on the Snowy Trail Bridge, and Ms May Leach. Welcome, and please come and talk to us.
Thanks for the opportunity to present to Council today about an exciting project that a group in Orbost, in fact pretty much all the Orbost community are pushing forward with. Our committee chairman Liz Mitchell is unavailable today. She's out doing bike rides with some of her clients on the rail trail. May's our vice president. May's just getting over some medical issues, so I'm helping with the presentation. I've got a presentation there to do on the slides, which, John, I guess you'll be able to look at there. So, for those of you that don't know, there's the Orbost Rail Bridge, This is taken from the Numarella Lookout. Obviously, as you can see, the highway runs to the right of it there. Very visible from the highway for anyone coming into town, and this is quite relevant. A photo coming back from the other direction, and one of the statistics about the bridge there, it's 770 metres long, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. So, highly visible from the highway, and you all would have seen it, and you would have seen our banner as you came down the hill today into Orbost. So, parts of the bridge are deteriorating, and that's a slide just showing part of the top of the bridge that's deteriorating. And so people ask the question, why aren't they, or why aren't someone doing something about it? And here's another example of how it looks. This bridge was built in 1915. It's a landmark, it's a historic bridge, but it's now threatened with demolition by neglect. It is gradually falling down. It's falling down for two reasons. One is some of the piles are rotten, and a lot of it is the top infrastructure where the ballast was is rotting apart, and that's causing a lot of that that you can see there. So, as you know, coming down the hill, you saw we've had a campaign going for about 6 months with this new banner, trying to raise community awareness that this bridge is in need of restoration. And once again, if we don't do something about it, it will just fall down. So why restore it? Obviously, it's a highly visible landmark. I'll keep saying it, you keep seeing it, everyone sees it as they come into Orbost. It's deteriorating, but the third point's probably one of the key points. We don't want Orbost to be known as the place where you see the falling down bridge as you come into town. Because what will that say about our town? Will that say we don't appreciate our town, we're not a vibrant town? We want to market this bridge as something that's the gateway to Orbost. It's a place where you can start or finish the rail trail. It's a place where you actually remember it when you come down the hill and say, gee, I actually should go and have a look at that, I should go and ride on it. So these people, if our dream comes true, will be actually riding along the rail trail, along the bridge for the last section of the rail trail, rather than riding along the path next to the road there. So our vision is to create a unique, authentic and historic feature which visitors can engage with. It's to create a marketing tool for the town and for the district with that wow factor. Do you remember that bridge we saw when we were coming into Orbost? Isn't it a great place? And weren't there a lot of things we could do when we called into Orbost and found what the district has to offer? We need to re-energise the town, and this has become very, very important in the last couple of days, given some other announcements by government about what it's going to do to the economy of our town. And we also want to promote Orbost as a place where people have a sense of pride, but also a place that, because it looks vibrant, people might come and retire here or have a sea change here. So it's all those factors. These are all the reasons that so the proposal, the 770 metres, we would like to restore it back to a situation where it's stable. We would like to put a new top on it, and it then becomes a connection with the rail trail. It becomes a connection with a number of walks that you can do from Orbost out in that direction to Grandview, to Lock End, to Beatballong. And one of the key things is going to be, what do we surface it with? Do we make it completely as it was and put timber back on it? Or do we look at some of these newer products, these composite mesh products, which will have far less maintenance requirements into the future? The one thing that is not going to be original about the bridge is we're going to have to put handrails on, of course, from a safety point of view. So I've pretty much talked about that. So here's an example of a Nuji, a very similar bridge, high bridge obviously, and the handrail's not that easy to see. So from a distance you'll hardly see the handrail. Here's another example from Koetong where they had a bridge that was in worse condition than ours is, and on the right hand side is how it's been restored. In that case they took it back to the old wooden structure. Once again they had a different handrail set up and we haven't decided exactly which way we'll go there. Another one at Skipton near Ballarat. Once again they've had to put a handrail on it. And another one at Kilcunda, which some of you may have seen down on the Bass Coast. Once again, from a distance, that handrail is not that obvious. So these are all bridges that have been restored and made into cycling trails, and obviously had to have that handrail put on them. So, what's it going to cost? There has been a socio-economic study done just earlier this year, and the initial estimates are of the order of 3.5 million. Now these figures need to be refined because we haven't finalised the decking option and we haven't finalised the options for the handrail, so they're quite significantly large proponents of the cost. But it's not a cheap thing, but it's in the big picture 3.5 million is also not a great amount of money when you look at some of the projects that government spend money on. Here's an example of the Port Welshpool jetty. It had nearly $11 million spent on it. Much longer than ours, of course, but also it's become a very, very significant tourist attraction down in that part of the world. So, the cost has been an interesting one in terms of our community. When the figures were initially thrown around about the cost of this project, the potential cost, people were saying, that's a waste of money, I'd rather spend it on the hospital, or I'd rather get an aged care home, or I'd rather spend it on some other infrastructure in the town. But when it was explained to people that this sort of money will come from a tourism bucket or a heritage bucket, and that sort of money is going to be spent somewhere in Victoria, and it can't be spent on hospitals, it can't be spent on education, it's in a bucket that's going to go to tourism or heritage. It really changed the community around. So if government's got pools of money, then why shouldn't it be spent in this part of the world rather than somewhere else? And so I guess there's, in terms of community support, it was a real turning point in terms of people saying, well, yeah, that's not a bad idea, and if we can do something to improve our town and it's got to be spent somewhere, let's go for it. So that's where to from here. We have to do some more work on the costings because a lot of that is projected stuff. We've actually got to get some really good advice from people who have done these jobs. We did get some advice initially a couple of years ago now from a group that had been involved with the Puffing Billy Railway, and a lot of our costs have been projected from them. But before we start asking people for money, we need to ensure that the 3.5 million is a realistic figure. And then we need to go and source some fundings, state and federal government obviously, but obviously we also need some sort of in-principle support for council, from council, sorry. And one of the issues, of course, that you guys will be concerned about is the ongoing maintenance responsibilities, who that's going to be, and that's obviously not resolved at this stage, and that needs to be worked through also. We've certainly done some estimates on what we think maintenance will be, and particularly if we use these low-cost composite materials for the decking, and it's probably of the order of $20,000 to $25,000 a year over a 15-year period. That's not taking into account if a flood wipes the whole thing out, of course. But that would be a different source of funds. And you've got to be realistic, that could happen. Let's hope we get a flood one day. But that's just the ongoing minor maintenance. So that's all I've got to say. I guess what we wanted to do is give you the opportunity to ask us some questions too, and depending on what time you have available.
Thank you for that, Gary. But I would suggest that over its more than 100 years life, it may have seen a few floods before, and it's still there. So that could be something that will remain so. Now, councillors, I'd just ask if any of you have any questions. Councillor Reeves.
Gary and May, thanks so much for your passionate work, and Liz in particular. I think I saw her with her clients down at Now an Hour today on the road. Are there any issues, Gary or May, around the heritage values or heritage aspects of the bridge that may have to be considered or may be compromised by any work on the bridge? And is that something we need to be concerned about and in balance? And how do we meet that balance about heritage values, practical values? I'd love to ride that bridge. I think it'd be fantastic. How do we overcome those issues, if there are any?
Press the button. Yes, thank you. I've worked with Heritage for quite a few years. I used to work in New South Wales as a manager there of heritage properties, so particularly in Nowra I'm speaking about. The usual thing with heritage is no matter what the listing, you deal with a very old bridge here, and we're not talking about its level of listing or anything like that. We want to be very considerate to do the right thing in terms of heritage values, and there's no doubt about that, but it does have significant heritage values. The usual thing with work is to replace like with like. So certainly the significant structure there of the underneath piles are like with like operation, that we would be using timber piles, and with the visual look of it to be maintained, of course. The interesting part that Gary's been alluding to there before, and that you might be suggesting, is the issue of the decking on top. And there's been a recent example, it's the Kilcunda Bridge, which has used composite mesh, and you'd be aware that a lot of the walkways in national parks, in places like that, are going that way these days. It's purely a maintenance type thing. So there's a lot of products coming on the market now which are of that sort of category. They're called composite mesh, composite fibre technologies. Some of them have recycled materials, and I'm certainly very positive about using recycled materials as a matter of ethics, I think. And your question probably is, does that compromise the historic integrity of the bridge? The clear precedent is the Kilcunda Bridge, and they've recently done the decking there, and we've got a good understanding of how they've done that, and it is the highest status of our heritage listing in Victoria, and that's been done with composite mesh, using it sort of floats, if you can imagine, on top of the original structure, and the mesh sort of sits on top of that structure with its own integrity of what do you call, scaffolding or something like that underneath it. That's how it is done. So we've got a fairly clear understanding of how that would resolve. Thank you.
Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the New Morella end, I can't quite see on this tiny map how it connects up there. What's the story? Can we get it on the bigger screen or easily, or because the rail trail plan to use the whole length of the bridge? That's what I'm trying to get at, because there doesn't seem to be a connection at the western end, or the New Morella end, to the structure that I can see here on this map.
Yes, Councillor Buckley, it is connected to the rail trail. There's actually currently a walking track which comes off the rail trail to the western end of this bridge. and a picnic area there. So you can actually walk right to the western end of the bridge right now. So when this bridge is refurbished, you'll continue on that as the rail trail.
Yeah, okay, the bikes can go all the way.
Yes.
You don't have to get off and walk or anything
No.
like that, no. And that follows the old easement.
Yes, that's right. The old coach trail. Yeah.
Yeah, would there be any possibility of perhaps having just doing a section of it that would restore the value of it a bit? I know you want the whole, would like the whole thing to be complete, but is there any likelihood, I know that you were mentioning those millions of dollars, that you did say half of it and connected up to a viable rail trail? Would that be possible, or an alternative in case you couldn't get all that money?
Well, if you only restored half of it, then it would be a dead end in the middle of a farmer's paddock. So
No, but connected up with just an ordinary gravel bike trail to half of it, if you understand what I mean. The best half to restore, which
Yeah,
would cost the least amount of money.
yeah, but
Maybe from the station back to the west and pick it up with an ordinary gravel rail trail, wouldn't work?
it certainly wouldn't achieve the goals. I mean, one of the goals is to be able to ride the whole length of it as either a start or end of the rail trail journey. I mean, we also have visions of some loop trails that people can walk from Orbost. For instance, when this is restored, you could then do a loop trail from Orbost up to the lookout at New Morella, and then come back along the actual bridge back to Orbost on a loop trail. You know, there's a walking bike trail. Yeah. So there's all sorts of options to increase the number of activities that people can do from Orbost, whether it be local or whether it be tourists to the area.
I think too, one thing about the bridge, sorry, yeah, thanks, Gary. One thing about the bridge that's always occurred to me is that it is spectacular. And we want to maintain that spectacular quality, that wow quality. If most of it is let fall down and just a tiny bit is retained, I think that is not a legitimate bang for buck, basically, in the project that we're about anyway. We want to maintain that as it's a spectacle. It's a big bridge, and it is highly significant for Orbost. So that is the whole overall vision. We're not into, as Gary said, just doing something which is a bit of a token gesture, really. It's much more important than that to maintain the whole integrity we feel.
But we'd have to justify the expenditure of several millions to the rest of the electorate. And it's turning into a bit of a Raymond Island ferry in a way. Not as bad as that, of course.
No,
but
we're definitely not going to come to you looking for 3.5 million. We'll go to federal and state government looking for that.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Now, Councillor Peltz has a question to ask too.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And coming across down the cutting today and having a look at the bike sitting on top of the bridge with the sign, it is, and as May, alluded to, it is a real vision, and it is really eye-catching, and it's a construction that has a lot of historical value in the way of engineering, I'm sure, over with engineering history from the past times gone by. But curiously, I'd be interested on whose asset register it is actually currently held.
It's actually state government. It's a state government railway alignment still through there. It's under the auspice of DELP these days, yes. DELP, by way of, default, I suppose, are the managers of the public land and therefore the bridge. And you could possibly say over the years that they've done nothing, and that's true.
As a backup, that we had to get DELP's permission to put the bike up on top of it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks very much for that.
Were there any more questions? No. would I be permitted to ask one question, please? At this end, where the cement works are, what would be your proposal and then your access to the town as you drop down to that level, like where the trail may go from there, please, Gary?
Yeah, where the road crosses the rail trail there, just on this side of that, there will need to be a small car park, and that will be the end of the rail trail. And so you'll still follow the existing trail for the last little section over the Snowy Bridge back into Orbost. Yeah, 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 yeah. There's still a short section that you'll come on the gravel trail back and then over the Snowy Bridge back into Orbost.
Just to add to that, there is a smaller section of viaduct too, which is leads up to where the original station was. We're not proposing to restore that. We think it's much more flood liable, and also it lacks a little bit of the spectacle of the big bridge. So our project has been concentrating on the 770 metre long spectacle of the big bridge. Yeah.
I might allow that, Councillor Buckley.
Have you sort of thinking along the lines of eventually connecting this up to a trail down to Marlow? Has that been thrown at you?
Oh yeah, the number one priority project on the Orbost Community Plan is a walking bike trail from Marlow to Orbost. So yeah, one day it would be great to have the rail trail connected to the Orbost to Marlow bike cycle track, which could then connect to one that goes from Marlow to Conran, which could then connect to one that goes to Bem River and Can River, if you like. Very long term.
Well, thank you for that, but Councillor Peltz has something to
yes,
ask
Mr.
also.
Mayor, I was just hoping to indulge the council and move that we suspend standing orders at the moment, so that we might hear a few words from Mr. Gary Squires in relation to the Andrews government timber announcement last week, the 7th of November, please, and to understand perhaps, I think you are prepared to have a few words on that at this stage.
So, Councillor Peltz, you're moving that. Could we? Yes, absolutely. I think.
Well, if we're doing that, wouldn't it be more appropriate, Mr. Mayor, for me to flag that I wish to lodge a matter under urgent and other business in relation to the Premier's statement in relation to the timber industry, and perhaps I could ask that the matter, after hearing from Mr. Squires, be brought forward for discussion at this early part of the meeting. Noting this, I had anticipated this request would have come later in the meeting.
Well, might I?
You have a motion.
Yes, yes.
Motion and a seconder, so you need to put it to the vote.
Do you want to?
Yeah.
I'm happy to.
Yeah, you need to formally withdraw it otherwise, but I think you actually need to.
How does Gary get to talk to it later?
Well, inviting to do the same thing.
Inviting.
Yes, would that, just talking to Mr. Squires, just you'd be comfortable to do that? It might save a lot of confusion right at the moment, and we just go through the process point by point in the meeting, and so it would appear that Councillor Peltz would wish to formally withdraw this motion at this stage.
Okay, sorry to confuse everyone. I do wish to formally withdraw my my suspension of standing orders, please. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Gary. Very informative. Thank you. Now, next we have our public question time, of which We have a couple. I would like to report that Deb Foskey from 73 Stanley Street, Orbost, has a question, and I'll pass over to the CEO. All right. Is Ms. Foskey in the? Would you like to come forward? Oh, is it? Do we get to charge penance for the mobile phone going off? No, welcome. No, welcome, and please proceed with your question.
Okay, well, thanks very much. You're unaware of my question, no doubt. Or I have asked Colleen to distribute the sort of briefing paper afterwards so that you will be in no doubt what I'm talking about. Well, thank you very much. First of all, I want to acknowledge the Gunai Kurnai traditional owners and pay my respects to the elders. I'm standing here today. I've had many roles over the years, but at this point I'm standing here as the chair of the Orbost Exhibition Centre, to which I was recently elected at the AGM in October. What I'm doing here is following up on a briefing that was first prepared for the Mayor at the time, Natalie, and the CEO, and I just wanted to bring these matters to the attention of the whole Council. Oh, that's someone else's phone. Look, we live in a modern age. You'd all be aware from wherever you live that it's frequently the voluntary groups that keep communities alive, and this is just as true in Orbost as anywhere else. For those of you who know that I've lived in Cabanandra between Tubbut and Bonang for many, many years. That's a community that runs on volunteers, and I moved to Orbost in August due to not such great reasons, but here I am. And now I've taken the decision to be involved in this town because it's where I live.
Excuse me, please. Sorry to interrupt, but please, it's just to ask the question. So if
thank you. That's a good. Thank you.
A segue.
Yes, I want to ask the question, but I do need to prepare so that you give the right answer. How can the East Gippsland Shire Council assist the Orbost exhibition to be a vibrant arts and cultural centre? Now, for those of you who don't know about the exhibition centre, it is actually leased from the Shire at a peppercorn rent. It's, for those of you perhaps who can't even picture it, it's located on the northern edge of Forest Park. It overlooks the Snowy and, of course, the park. It's been there since the early 90s, and it is there as a result of a lot of activity from the community to get it built in the first place. It was, I think the 90s, perhaps if we can all think back to that time, was a time when there was a bit of excitement, not just about the timber industry with some hope, I think, but also about the future of our forests. And we had things like the Rainforest Information Centre, which is now the Orbost Neighbourhood House, and we had the Wood Design Centre, which is the Exhibition Centre. And those were all based around aspects of the timber industry. The exhibition centre's always been staffed and managed by volunteers. It's one of those organisations. And just to let you know that it does accord with the revised council plan 2017 to 21 by supporting stronger communities through inclusive and vibrant events, opportunities to volunteer, being a community-controlled organisation, providing educational opportunities, celebrating culture, bringing people together, enhancing community cohesion, health and well-being, and catering for a wide variety of interests. It supports economic activity by providing a tourist activity and selling products made by local craftspeople, of course, with the emphasis on fine woodwork. in my time involved, I have seen a number of performances in the space. It is regarded as a really excellent performance space, great acoustics. It's pretty much where any group that wants to perform in Orbost comes. But it's also a gallery, and it tries to cater for the whole range of the arts, and unfortunately that is a niche that's not being filled in Orbost at the moment. We've got a craft shop in the main street. We sort of have a slightly different angle to that. We supplement that and work with them. But we were set up for the National Wood Design Collection, and that's became an exhibition and a competition that has been very popular for many, many years. Unfortunately, due to a lack of energy, the usual problem with getting volunteers, which befalls most organisations, for a while that lapsed. And it was only last summer that we were again able, we had the resources, the energy to have a wood design exhibition, and we are determined to hold that every year.
Well, thank you for that
you
explanation, and of course you've asked your question, so we will take that question on board and consider it, and I'm sure we will get back to you in
Right, well,
prompt
I hope
time.
you enjoy your briefing paper, and you'll be better informed.
Yeah, no,
and
thank you.
able to consider the question. Thank you.
Thank you. That. Now we have another question from Matthew Pearson from 11 Glendon Drive, Eastwood. Thank you for coming up to Orbost. Please come forward and ask a question.
Hi, Matthew Pearson. I'm pretty sure I CC'd everyone in on an email yesterday regarding community housing going up in Eastwood. So the development's going ahead at the moment, it's going ahead whether we like it or not, but my question would be, there's 12 blocks on the one street owned by DHS, and well, from what I understand, council's given approval for this one. Like, I have no problem with the need for community housing. It's the lack of transparency, lack of notification, and lack of information about what's there, what it's going to look like, who's going to be there. I've lived next to community housing before, and like it wasn't a good experience. So to have it all potentially clustered in one street in Eastwood, between Flint, like we're on Glendon Drive, between Flynn's Road and the Backwater. So we've spent, like, I've poured nearly $48,000 so far into my house, and we had it up for sale, and our potential buyer found out about what's going across the road and pulled out of the sale. So it's actually, like, it's affecting me financially. So I do understand also that DHS don't need Shire approval, but is Shire able to at least give us some sort of information about where is there going to be 12 lots of 2 units on one street in Eastwood would be my question. And do you have any right to protest?
I've read that email. I'm sure the other councillors have all read the email. I would suggest that it probably rests with our manager, Stuart O'Connell, to take your question on board and get back to you as soon as possible. Well, yes. So, Stuart, you may have some answers already.
Yeah, so I will take it on notice and do some more investigating, and we can certainly raise issues with DHHS, but probably just to confirm that in relation to this kind of, well, normally with these kinds of developments, it's the planning permit process that gives council a formal say in what happens, and with the community care housing, which this kind of thing fits under that category, the state government arrangements in the planning scheme, they've exempted themselves from the need for a planning permit. So you were right before to say they don't need council's approval. So we don't have a formal role in that, but we can certainly raise the issue with DHHS.
As I said in my email, when the letter got dropped off, the or the 6 units that are getting built require high fences and 24-hour staffing. High fences, is that to keep people out or keep people in, or and what's the requirement for 24-hour security? Like, I've got young kids. We came down I moved from Mornington to here for a quiet life. I work away in construction, so Thursday I set back off to Brisbane to work.
Yep. And
it's more, I've been a bit passive about it until our house sale fell through, but it's more my wife feeling uncomfortable, and I'm not there to support her now. Like, well, not support her, but not.
Yep.
I'm not around, like, so it worries me that the stress that it's going to put my family under. So
Okay.
that's it.
Well, thank you, Matthew, and we will certainly look at this situation for you.
No worries. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, could I just ask a question on this matter? And that simply is to Stuart, and that is a simple question of, would we be normally advised of such a consequential development as this, even though we have no role in the provision of planning permits? But wouldn't we, in terms of good order, be advised of something like this?
I need to do the research on this particular case. We're often become aware through various things, and in fact, whilst there's no planning permit, there's still a building permit, so there's another process by which we have an awareness of the development, but that's quite limited in its nature.
All right, well, we can move on to 1.9.1, which is assemblies of councillors, and I'm assuming that Peter Casanaro will speak to this. Is that correct, Peter? Yeah. Okay, all right, come. All moving faster than I am. So it's been moved by Councillor Peltz and seconded by Councillor Ellis. So all those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you. So now we ask for petitions, please, Mr. CEO.
Mr Mayor, there are no petitions at this meeting.
Thank you for that. Next we move to notice of motion and or rescission at 2.1.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillors, I bring to your attention a motion I have placed before Council this afternoon, headed motion number 4 of 2019, amendments to the Economic Development Advisory Board, terms of reference, makeup of board membership. Councillors, I move today that Council, 1, removes the Chief Executive Officer from the nominated membership of the East Gippsland Shire Council's Economic Development Advisory Board, as referenced at 2.3.4 of the adopted terms of reference, and in turn modifies the terms of reference to indicate that a delegate of the Chief Executive Officer attends the meetings but is not a meeting of the board. And 2,
Really?
I'll continue, Mr Mayor, as we're going. Removes the Mayor, East Gippsland Shire Council from nominated membership of the East Gippsland Shire Council's Economic Development Advisory Board as the Council's joint representative, and in turn nominates a councillor to that role. And that 3, Council continues to support the work of the Economic Development Advisory Board in the supply to Council of timely, considered and unbiased economic advice to the betterment of the East Gippsland community. Councillors, my rationale and argument for it...
You've got to get a second.
Oh, sorry, I should ask for a seconder for that, please, Mr Mayor.
As I said, I think everyone's moving faster than me today. Yes, could I please have a seconder? Is there a seconder in the room for this motion?
Happy to second that, Mr Mayor.
Seconded by Councillor Peltz.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll continue with my rationale, which has been provided in the printed and distributed agenda for today's meeting. Simply, it was identified during the adoption of the new terms of reference debate at last month's ordinary meeting that both the Mayor and Chief Executive Officer of the East Gippsland Shire Council were recorded as nominated members of an advisory committee to Council. This situation, particularly in regard to the Chief Executive Officer, was felt by councillors to be not appropriate in terms of good governance. As such, the motion before you is to correct this position and to ensure the independence and authority of the role of the Chief Executive Officer in providing uncompromised and clear leadership to Council. In regard to the Mayor, the need for reform is more so directed to having the right person appointed to the position. That is, someone who has a bent to the subject of economic development. The removal of the term Mayor would not preclude someone holding the position of Mayor from joining the board if he or she wished. It is the title that is removed. The application to amend a recently adopted position is admittedly a little unusual, but is arguably needed. It is a request that could be expanded in debate, but I ask that the matter be considered perhaps mechanical in nature. It is not a motion that negatively impacts on any individual or negatively interferes in the operation or status of the advisory board. It is a motion, councillors, that I commend to you for full support, and I ask for that support. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Peltz, would you like to speak?
I would. I'm actually in support of this motion. I'd just like to bring it to the council's attention, and I'm not sure at what stage this became, or how long this criteria has been in place, but in the previous two councils I seem to recall, because I haven't been actually on the Economic Development Board for the last 3 years, in the last two prior councils the Mayor and the CEO were never involved in the Economic Development Committee group, and I think it actually leaves an unbiased opinion, and the group is to be acting as I would presume like the Disability Advisory Board or the Audit Committee Board, on the basis that they are actually advisory committees, and I think all the structures should be put in alignment and be of similar basis. But I feel for the efforts of the community, I feel it's actually a good position to have both the Mayor and the Executive Officer an arm's length of the economic development position. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. Now, would anyone like to speak against the motion?
Yep, I certainly shall. Mayor, this has come as a surprise to see this here, this notice of motion, and I think it would have been better to have been discussed further around the table. And like what Councillor Peltz says, the Mayor and the CEO are both on the Audit Committee. I think that it's most appropriate, you said that they're not, I think it's most appropriate that the CEO is on the Economic Development Board, Advisory Board. I think there's the CEO representing the business of the organisation. I think it's most appropriate the CEO who has the understanding of the business of the Shire is there. Similarly, the Mayor is the representative of the Council, and the Mayor should be on that board as well, both in a titular and practical sense, to represent the views of the Council and also to be able to bring the views of the board back to Council as an obligation. So I don't support this motion. It's not necessary. I think the way the terms of reference are established at the moment are totally appropriate, and there's no need for this to change at all.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Now, Councillor O'Connell, you wish to speak?
Should be someone in favour who's for the motion.
Against. My apologies. So is there anyone else who would like to speak for the motion? Just a formality. There you go, Councillor O'Connell.
That's okay. Thanks, Mayor.
I'll support Councillor Reeves' statements. I think it is appropriate that the CEO and the Mayor, both being the heads of the organisation, economic development is a critical function of council, and it's important that the Mayor and CEO are at that table. It is an advisory committee, but it's important that they're there, given the important function it has to council. The CEO has been on, through the terms of reference, has been a part of the Economic Advisory Committee, so I'm not sure now, after 12 years or however long the Economic Development Committee has been in place, since 2005. In the previous terms of reference, the CEO was a part of it, so I'm not sure now why we would do this through a notice of motion. Normal process would be, calling it in for a review by council. But, I mean, further to that, it was unanimously supported at the October meeting, and we had plenty of time in briefings to raise this. So, but again, I think it's important that the Mayor and CEO are on, so I would be suggesting for councillors to vote against this. Thanks.
Councillor Ellis, your right of reply.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, for the opportunity to reply to some of the matters that have been put forward by the people in the negative. I do apologise to those two councillors who felt that I left this matter too late. I unfortunately had a health issue and was unable for 1 week to be able to do much council work. I did push it out as quickly as I could. Now, coming back to this matter, Councillor Peltz identified correctly that prior to 2000 and sometime in 2016, the CEO and Mayor were not members of the Advisory Committee for the Economic Development Advisory Committee. I have found no records to show that at all, so it's quite incorrect to say that this has been in place for the past 12 years. Another point too is that contrary to what Councillor Reeves has referred to in terms of the position of the CEO, the board is what it is. It's an advisory board, and at times it could place information before council that is contrary to the good governance of council, or could perhaps compromise the position of the CEO. A decision could be put up through the system that would be contrary to the independent management of this Shire, because of the fact that the CEO would have to vote to make a recommendation to council which might be contrary to council's good governance. This is not a personal matter. This is just a matter of proper governance, where we have an independent CEO. I'm remembering, councillors, that the CEO is appointed for that very purpose, is to provide, the CEO is appointed to provide proper independent advice and direction to not only council itself, but to his staff. To be compromised by an advisory committee is not appropriate. It's not a personal matter, this, it's just a matter of noticing that that's it. The weaknesses in this particular situation. It is something that we did not pick up. At the October meeting, I did raise the issue with the CEO and other councillors, but because I had not only just picked it up, I was not in a position to prosecute this particular motion at that time by amendment. I wanted to find out a bit more detail. I have spoken about this matter. I don't believe it's a secret. I think this is just a simple matter of good governance, and I would not like to see council form into a divisive position in relation to something that is mechanical. If the Mayor wishes to be on that advisory council, he or she, as I've already stated, can be on that page. The Mayor may be a person who is not interested in economic development and might be more interested in sustainability and the environment, as an example, as his or her priority. And that would not serve that particular committee to the greatest benefit. So, councillors, I say to you, please support this effective mechanical correction of something that occurred in perhaps the last 3 or 4 years that was not picked up by the wider council. I commend my motion to you for support.
Okay, I'll put this to the vote. All those in favour of Councillor Ellis's motion? Those against? Okay, we have 4-3. We have Councillor O'Connell, Councillor Reeves and Councillor Toohey who have voted against the motion. The motion is carried.
Mr Mayor, if I may, just a couple of minor implications that arise from that decision. So the next meeting of the Economic Development Advisory Board is on the 26th of November. So as it stands today, then there will be a councillor vacancy at the Economic Development Board unless the council decides otherwise. And then secondly, the Economic Development, normally the Mayor would chair the Economic Development Advisory Board as well, so that would be a matter that presumably could be resolved by the meeting, but I just draw those two implications to the attention of the meeting so that if there is a desire to address those, they can be addressed.
Mr Mayor, I'd like, taking the advice just provided by Mr O'Connell, I would ask that this matter be put forward into other business or urgent and other business, and that the vacancy be placed before council as a matter for to be dealt with under that in that time.
I would see that as an appropriate response. I think we. All right, we have a motion. It's seconded by Councillor Peltz. Do you wish to speak to this now?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Taking into account the situation that's been highlighted by Mr O'Connell, I would like to move that the matter of the, it's not casual vacancy, a vacancy occurring on the Economic Development Board, Advisory Board, be dealt with under urgent and other business.
Councillor Peltz, would you like to speak?
No, it's all good.
All right, do we have anyone that wishes to oppose the... All right, well, I think we'll just vote on the issue as such. Those in favour of filling this vacancy in urgent and other business later in the meeting? Those against? So we have 3 opposing, which is Councillor O'Connell, Councillor Reeves and Councillor Toohey. Thank you. Okay, next we have deferred business, and at this stage there is none, so we will move forward to councillor reports. So I'd ask Councillor Toohey please to give his report.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I did send my report in, admittedly late. It was earlier on today that I sent it in. I attended a number of different functions during the course of last month. The one I would probably like to highlight was the East Gippsland Business Awards Gala ceremony, and that particular function highlighted to me the endless breadth of businesses in East Gippsland and what they actually do for East Gippslanders in general. And I'm sorry I've got my back to people, but it was very enjoyable. It's the first time I've been to that award ceremony, and many worthy winners. And probably the worthiest, in my point of view, was the Ingram family out at Lindenow, who received, I can't recall the award off the top of my head, but the award for their input into our community over many years was very well deserved and very enjoyable to see. Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor. Councillors, good afternoon. Woman Inji, everybody who's here today. Thank you so much for being here. I'm going to focus on one event in the last month, the Big Bonang Community Barbecue. Now, I recall being at Bonang, among other times, in February 2014, after the fires that year, and that led to a commitment to ongoing support for our community event that focused on what was then recovery and now is on community wellbeing. And this year, a vibrant representation from Orbost Regional Health with speechies, OTs, doctors and more paraprofessionals. East Gippsland Shire was well represented there. Forest Fire Management was there, DELP, CFA, SES and other community volunteer organisations as well. And I was able to hear clearly from our friends in the Bonang community of their ongoing concerns, for example, of Regional Roads Victoria road maintenance or lack thereof, Bonang Highway completion, Parks Vic fire access issues, health and education challenges in this cross-border setting, among others. Now, I'd like to thank the committee on behalf of the Shire, the Committee of Management of the Hall and the local community and all the agencies who were there that day, Thursday week ago. This is important. These events are important. This community is important. It's one of our more isolated communities and their phone prefix is a New South Wales prefix and sometimes they feel forgotten. It's a pleasure to be there and I pledged to that community to raise their concerns as and where I can with the local authorities and politicians. I've done so and will continue to do so in the future. Thank you.
Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And between my preparation for this afternoon's meeting and my external responsibilities, I haven't had an opportunity to prepare anything today. So, please accept my apologies.
I think we could say apologies accepted. Councillor O'Connell.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll just focus on a couple. One being that I attended the Rural Councils Forum in Melbourne, which was a great day. Highlights included a keynote address from Gabrielle Chan, a political journalist and author of the book Rusted Off, Why Our Country Australia is Fed Up. It was a fantastic presentation. Also updates from Regional Development Victoria, CEO Beth Jones and other presentations as well. The CEO and I met with the Senior Advisor to the Minister for Education in relation to the World Sports Complex in Stage 2 of the Bairnsdale Secondary College, as well as the Expert Advisory Panel for Rural and Regional Students, and further meetings with relevant departments have been organised. And just to follow up on Councillor Tui's report on the East Gippsland Business Gala ceremony, it was an absolutely fantastic night, and I was very proud to present the Special Recognition Award on behalf of East Gippsland Shire to the deserving recipient, as mentioned by Councillor Tui, the Ingren family, which is presented to an individual or family who has made a significant and sustained contribution to the East Gippsland economy, which they have done so for many, many years. I also wanted to just make note that our fellow Councillor Rotino, who's not here, was acknowledged quite often during that night by a few of the sponsors and recipients, namely being the Federation Business School, who credited Councillor Rotino with the MBA course being delivered locally from Bairnsdale, and also Rob Turner from Northern Ground, who acknowledged Councillor Rotino's support for those local food businesses that have been established. So it was great to have our fellow councillor recognised in that way. And I just wanted to congratulate Janet Burton and the organising committee on another great night, and it was a real success. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last month I attended the function put on for the by the Shire at the function centre at Lucknow, and I've got a snap of it here if any councillors, it might have come up on your machines. I'm not sure, but you're very welcome to have a look at this, as long as I get it back. And there was about nearly 200 elderly people there, seniors, including me, of course, and I'm dancing with some elderly ladies here. We're having a great time, and their carer is keeping a close eye on me. And that was that one. And now the next one is this lady, Anne Durry, Nawatka. She's a Swiss lady who has lived at Newlands Arm for a long time, and she's put out this book. She's put out a lot of effort into it, and it's an excellent little read. And when I finish with it, I'll be only too pleased to put it into the Shire Library if we got one. Does anyone know here if we've got a Fiona a library? Well, when I finish reading this, I'm only too pleased to pass it on. Yeah. And the other one was yesterday myself and my daughter Nellie attended a memorial service at the Brunambra Hall Monument, which is quite substantial and lists many names from World War I, 8 actually, who made the supreme sacrifice, and only one for World War II. That shows us the declining population in some of these remote areas. There were no entries for Korea, Vietnam or Afghanistan. Someone had left a brand new Australian flag at my place for the occasion. We don't know who. My remembrance speech, the ode, was quite short, as Nellie and I were the only ones there, the function not being well advertised. This is a postscript. There were once 5 state schools on the Omeo Plains, in the Omeo Plains area. Now there are none. So that, I suppose, shows us something of the changing drift in population and so forth. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Well done. Councillor Ellis, your report, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll keep mine very brief and provide the written copy later. A couple of highlights during October included being part of a presentation to Minister D'Ambrosio in relation to the soon-be released policies in relation to the circular economy, which will have a quite serious impact upon communities and this council, this council statewide. A pleasure was to attend and pay part of the opening of the Patricia Pittman art exhibition, an Aboriginal artist from Bega that has shifted down to our region and is doing some extremely colourful and quality works. And I encourage all councillors and members of the public to attend Patricia's exhibition at the Keeping Place in Bairnsdale. It was one of the better of the exhibitions we've seen for some time. I attended the MAV State Council and Conference, was involved in a number of debates at those functions. I attended the parliamentary inquiry into the tackling of climate change and travelled with the parliamentary panel over the lake system whilst here at Paynesville. I also, along with most of the other councillors, attended the rating panel consultation process at Bairnsdale, and also attended the rural councils and that event and saw Councillor Buckley actually doing his rock and roll dances with those ladies. So I will pass on, and I'd like to congratulate Councillor White on his appointment to the role of Mayor and wish him the very best for the next 12 months, and to my bestest wishes also go to our new Deputy Mayor, Councillor Buckley. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Peltz, your report, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've had a really busy month, I have to say, and it started off with rural councils, the AGM and the Mayoral and CEO Forum down in Melbourne, which was probably my first appointment to the committee of the Rural Councils Committee, and we ended up having a really good workshop there with all of the mayors and the CEOs with regards to points that are actually most affecting our regions. So after we'd finished that workshop, it was being taken back to be collated, and will come back to us at the next meeting, which is Friday this week, with regards to you know, the things most affecting rural Victorians, so that we can take it on to state government and push our issues. The next thing, I wanted to commend the group here for the 100-year flower show, and I know Ray Wilkins is in the gallery, and the likes of Heather Richardson and many of the ladies worked hard to be able to present their exhibits for that day, and to be able to state that you've had 100 years of a flower exhibition is absolutely extraordinary, and I commend the ladies on their efforts on keeping that going, and some of the exhibits were exquisite, and to walk into that little church there smelt absolutely heavenly. And just wanted to say thank you to all the volunteers that helped make that day a real success, because it was really well patronaged. The school, I think the ABC broadcasted it, and the school came in and they had a little sing-along, and the children sang Tiptoe Through the Tulips, which was absolutely delightful. And I'd never heard the full version of that before, but it was absolutely gorgeous. And I just wanted to commend the community efforts of this region. The next thing I went down to, when I was at Rural Councils, I also then attended the next day the MAV annual conference, and there was a lot of talk in that area of waste management. Funnily enough, when I went to the seats meeting last weekend, they seemed to be leaps and bounds in front of Victoria with regards to waste initiatives, and I'll chat about them shortly, about what they're doing in that space just within their communities, but there is things that they are doing that we could actually take note of and introduce to our regions, which I would be excited if our officers would lead us along that path. I then went to the seats and chaired the seats meeting up there in Mollymook. It was an arduous drive, a 7-hour drive basically. We have a new executive officer, which is a really interesting man by the name of Andrew Martin, who's come from a huge transport background, and we're hoping he'll help drive that group forward. The main projects that they're working on at the moment are the priority projects, which is being finalised, and East Gippsland has put in something like 12 submissions into that, so it'll be put through the grinding process, and we will end up with many of our items being prioritised against 16 other councils in the Eastern Seaboard, and then once they're on that list and they're in a position to be considered, the funding will come through when state and federal government are looking at opportunities to fund projects. So those are happening in the background, it's all bubbling away, and also the wooden bridges replacement program is also another one that SEETS is working on. And to let you know that East Gippsland Shire Council has benefited probably about $1.6 million towards replacement of wooden bridges, which is probably something that we just take for granted, but they are bridges that are in remote rural areas such as Bonang, Tubbard, up the top end there. They're wooden bridges, they're very old, they're not weight bearing, and they're bridges that we would not have had the opportunity to replace unless we'd received that funding earlier than now. So to help the public understand, the SEETS group is actually really beneficial for our council to be on anyway. With that said, tomorrow we're actually going to be having a look at the streetscape here. I just wanted to read from Mark's report of what's happening in our region so that there's a bit of interest. Works for the replacements of Timbarra Road Bridge are progressing. The Orbost Streetscape is now practically complete, and we'll have a look at that tomorrow with the councillor group. The Lakes Entrance Streetscape is progressing as well with with signals at the pedestrian crossings. We've got Regional Roads Victoria addressing safety treatments on the Princess Highway through the township of Johnsonville and Nicholson and Swan Reach, so that these little townships that are based on the highway are actually getting recognised for safety upgrades for their community, which is really important. With that said, there was many other things discussed, but they're probably the main priorities for our town and our region as it's stated. Also, I'd like to state the council group as a whole had the 2 cross-border commissioners come in this month and it was really great to have the New South Wales Cross-Border Commissioner and the Victorian Cross-Border Commissioner in the room at the same time, so that we could talk about the cross-border issues in regards to, you know, Bonang and Malakuta and all the services that we provide jointly to these regions, and how we can work hand in hand together to make our lives easier to be able to service those communities. So it was really great to have them there and to be able to express our concerns for our outer-lying regions. And I think that's probably all I wanted to chat about, and I'll write up my report and send it through to the ladies. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz and other councillors, for those reports. And I can't emphasise more strongly the importance of being on these external bodies and committees to, one, advocate for our shires, and two, to just gather information so that we can make our shire better as a result of that. And thank you for your efforts. Now, with regard to my report, I've been to many things in a very short space of time, but I'd like to talk about a couple of them. They may not be in order of date, but I did chair the Bairnsdale Chamber of Commerce annual general meeting, which was unfortunately the outgoing president was ill on the night and couldn't attend, but I would just like to announce that Jamie Savoury, with quite a bit of banking background history, is now the president, and in speaking to Jamie, she is a very, very capable woman, and I see the chamber moving ahead. It has been revitalised, and I see it moving further ahead and doing great things for at least the owners of businesses in Bairnsdale. The tip shop was another AGM that I attended, and it was very pleasing to see how well they've meshed with council in terms of how they take the best of the landfill and what they do with it. We have our polystyrene crushing plant to minimise the bulk and volume of cartage, because it obviously has no weight, and just the quantity of landfill that they have that has not gone to landfill because of having the chip shop in place was quite astonishing. So I wish them all the best in the future, and I believe on possibly this Saturday they're having a birthday, 10th birthday. So I just encourage anyone that's available to go out and support them. We also, I don't know why I felt uncomfortable, but I've never been to Kinder in my life, but I got to go to 2 of them in one day. So my wife always picks on me for the fact that I missed out on something very special in early childhood. However, we had the parliamentary secretary visit us for early childhood learning, Sonia Kilkenny, and what a great person she is. She was absolutely really into the task, and what she came for was at Coates Road in Lakes Entrance, a rather large contribution from state government to enlarge that facility for the early childhood, the 3-year-olds, and that was gratefully accepted by the staff down at that Kinder. And what amazed me was there was a room full of actual babies having their sleep time around lunchtime, and I've gone, wow. So it was almost like a childcare facility as well. But the staff are incredible. They're so devoted to their work and their love of children. And we came back to Bairnsdale. I was navigating for the CEO to find the Westdale kindergarten, and we couldn't find it. And that was the kinder my wife went to, and it wasn't there anymore. But a phone call, and it's been moved, and it's now at the near the netball courts at the high school. So that was another announcement there to enlarge that kinder. I think the figure was 300,000, and that's to give them the opportunity to take 3-year-olds on at that kinder. And what was astonishing, it's been over a period of 10 years, but that committee has raised themselves from the community $200,000. So that's a very big number, and that's giving them $500,000 to go towards upgrading that facility. Now, yesterday was Remembrance Day, and the CEO and I attended the war graves at the Bensdale Cemetery for the RSL service there. It was a moving service. It actually is the 100th Remembrance Day service yesterday. The first service was in 1919, exactly 1 year after the armistice was signed. Now, Friday I attended MAV Emergency Management in Melbourne, and discussion came around, which there will be more discussion later in the meeting, about the timber industry and the announcements. And the question's been raised, and it's actually a motion which will go to as many government members and opposition members as possible about what will happen as the timber industry declines and moves away to all the infrastructure that the parks and Vic Forest have relied on during emergencies, i.e. all the heavy machinery that goes out into the forest to attack these large uncontrolled blazes, and what will happen when those pieces of equipment are no longer available, and also the fact that the people that drive them with the local knowledge will not be available also. So there is a possible pending problem with regards to fighting forest fires in the future. So anyway, that's my report. Thank you. Have we any deferred business, Mr. CEO?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, no, we don't.
Sorry. Now, we have our first of our officer reports at item 5. Which is... Go back. Here we go. Yeah. Sorry, so this is the draft proposed adoption of new council policy and council representation. Yeah. So, Manager Mr. Cannizzaro, would you like to speak to this, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I take it the report has been read. The report is seeking adoption of a new policy titled Council Representation Policy. A copy is attached in Appendix 1. The policy is prepared to guide all aspects of council representation on external organisations and internal boards and committees, and will assist in council laws when they make their reports at council meetings with respect to structure and formality. The recommendation is to adopt the council representation policy provided in Appendix 1 and authorise any amendments to the councillors' support and expenses policy to reflect any reporting obligations set out in the reporting requirements clause of the policy, and then authorises the CEO to amend the adopted policy without any formal council consideration if there are any administrative changes, such as changes to officer titles and the like. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Would somebody like to move? Councillor Pell? Oh, sorry, I've got ahead of myself. So a question from Councillor Peltz, please.
Sure, thank you. Peter, down at the bottom of page 9 in the last sentence it says, all members of the community will have an opportunity to gain a better understanding of the advocacy being undertaken and ask questions about it and potentially offer constructive feedback or input. Can you please explain how that's going to happen in the process of us being able to do our advocacy work in regards to additional representation on organisations?
If I may, Councillor Pells, what page is that again, sorry?
9, at the bottom of page 9, the last statement. I sort of feel it's a bit of an unusual ask.
Right. The policy is designed such that councillors who are making representations will present a report to council. So it's provided a written report to council, a written report. In that way, that will be made available to the public in our minutes, and of course the community has access to that by way of minutes at any time.
So they will write in, you're saying the public will write in after reading what's in our reports? Hang on. So what you're suggesting is that the public will write in after reading our reports from the minutes, and if they have questions they're able to do so. Would that not normally come underneath a FOI or a what is it, yeah, an FOI?
What I was suggesting, Councillor Pels, was that councillors would be preparing a written report, and that would be inserted in the minutes, so the community has access to those minutes, and if the community wishes to seek further information or have a question, they do in the ordinary course, either make a phone call to councillors or perhaps have a question during public question time.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
You had a question, Councillor Reeves?
Thanks, councillors. Mr Cannizzaro, I think this is a great report, and I think it's a great move forward, councillors, for our accountability and transparency. I note in the suggested document that there are some guidelines around which the format of the report. But I'm just wondering, Mr Cannizzaro, if it wouldn't be a reasonable thing to include a template at the back of that document, so that we have consistency, uniformity, and that the content maintains its suitability. And so, there's a field. We don't end up having War and Peace written in there, nor do we end up just having dot points. But it just gives a guide for the size, the scope, and the and that uniformity, so that councillors can just complete it, submit it, and then you can just insert it straight into the minutes.
Through you, Mr Mayor, I think that's a great idea. Thank you. We'll take, yeah, exactly.
We'll leave it in your hands.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Ellis, you also have a question.
Mr Cannizzaro, I'm just following through on Councillor Reeves' question there. I'm interested to see how much additional work council officers, noting that under the provisions there are going to be new titles for officers and reporting to how much extra work and what liaison will be with councillors in relation to these new reporting systems.
Again, through you, Mr Mayor, the representation policy is about good governance and transparency, and it will require councillors to document those representations. With respect to officers' impact, particularly on recommendation 3, I see minimal administrative changes, as officer titles would be few and far between in terms of making those changes, so it's more an administrative procedural change that the CEO would do in any course, in any event, to amend the policy without referral back to council through a formal adoption or resolution of an amended policy.
All right. Okay, we have Councillor Reeves is moving it. Councillor O'Connell is seconding the motion. So, Councillor Reeves, would you wish to speak?
Absolutely. I think this is a great step forward in transparency, accountability, provides information to the community about our representation, our work that we do. I think it's a valuable thing. It'll be on the record, and councillors should be proud of their representation and the ability to have a receptacle now in the council minutes each week that provides a place for their important work and representation, which has been alluded to as being so important.
Councillor O'Connell.
I'll just support Councillor Reeves. I think it's a natural way forward following the adoption of the recommendation at last month's meeting around council representation, so happy to support it.
Do we have any councillors who wish to speak against this? Speak to it. Thank you, Councillor Ellis.
I'm happy to support the matter of reform at this stage, particularly taking into account the amount of reform going on across the local government sector. The recommend, as Councillor O'Connell referred to, the adoption of our representational status at last month's meeting was important, and our representation is impacted by this new recommendation before us. The MAV in particular are going through reform, and it may be that we may need to return to revisit our representations following our withdrawal from several of the advisory committees to the MAV. This form of reporting will assist councillors in assessing whether or not any future reform is of value to this particular council. We can only wait and see how these changes turn to the benefit of the community and East Gippsland Shire. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Councillor Peltz, you would like to speak?
Yes, I'd like to speak for it. The motion here, I felt that we already had in place anyway. I felt that this was something that is already a best practice for councillors to do. Something I've always tried to proceed with and inform my community and my other fellow councillors. So it's going to be, no different work as far as I'm concerned. And it also makes us accountable to the public on additional expenditure. And, you can see, see where the expenditure's going and for what reasons. And I think it's a really good initiative. So thank you.
Do we have any more speakers? All right. I think and nobody speaking against, so I think we can put this to the vote. So all those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you, councillors.
Yeah, we got 8.
5.1.2 is our community infrastructure loans scheme. So, Peter, would you be speaking to this too? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Victorian Government in September 2019 released an opportunity for local councils to upgrade community infrastructure through low interest loan schemes. The features include that the low interest loan would be financed through Treasury Corporation Victoria. Loans would be between $500,000 to $10 million with a maximum of $10 million. The low interest finance will also include receiving further interest subsidies to the tune of 50% of the applicable rate at the particular time, up to a maximum of 1.5% subsidy. The loan duration is up to 15 years and successful and eligible projects must commence within 18 months and must be completed within 36 months of a funding agreement being executed. Councillors, with that background, we have a great opportunity to apply for a low interest loan towards the Eagle Point Foreshore Hub. The Eagle Point Foreshore Hub meets the eligibility criteria and will be shovel ready by the timeframes as espoused by the Community Infrastructure Loan Scheme. You will know that the Eagle Point Foreshore Hub has been identified as a high priority project in both the adopted Eagle Point Structure Plan and the draft Eagle Point Marine and Coastal Management Plan, and I present to Council the recommendation for endorsement.
Thank you for that. We have some questions. Councillor Peltz.
Sorry, I just need some clarification, if I may, Peter, with regards to the 150 basis points, please, that's in paragraph 2.
Sure. the TCV is offering a subsidy of 50% of the applicable interest rate at the time. So, for example, in September 2019, the 10-year rate was 1.42. If that rate was, and if we applied and we were successful in terms of our application, the applicable rate would be less than 1.42. We would receive a 50% subsidy, so it might end up being 0.7%. But we couldn't get the 1.5% subsidy because the rate is at 1.42 at the moment. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely, certainly.
I recommend it.
Do we have any more questions? Oh, yeah. I was asked a question outside of council why we didn't ask for the whole 10 million, but I had to explain that that was the cost of the project. we couldn't get any more, so now I would ask for anyone who would like to move that motion. So it's moved by Councillor Ellis, seconded. Councillor Jackson Roberts has seconded. All right. So we could vote on it now, please. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you, councillors. Now next, we have our Finance Officer to present our finance report ending September 30. Thank you, Ms Collins.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is the finance report for the first quarter of the 2019-20 year as required under the Local Government Act. The finance report compares our actual performance, financial performance to date with the budget expectations. As noted in the report, there is a revised surplus expected. The reduction in the surplus that was adopted in the budget in June is primarily the result of the carry forward projects that were grant funded in last year but will be completed in the current financial year. There was over $2.3 million worth of expenditure added for those projects, but this has been offset with additional Roads to Recovery grant funding that we'll be receiving and some other operating grants, but also takes into account the reduction in the final allocation for the Victorian Grants Commission for the 19-20 year. So the estimated surplus at the end of the year is now reduced by that $1.18 million. I'm happy to take any questions. I'll take the report as being read. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Collins. Questions, councillors? Councillor Reeves.
Thanks, Ms Collins. Comprehensive as ever. Given that we've just agreed to borrow $3 million, I always ask the question, having said that, can we still afford to pay our bills if and when they fall due?
Thank you, Councillor Reeves. Certainly, if we're successful with the application under the loan scheme, the additional repayment requirements, if we took it over the 15 years, would be minimal in terms of the impact through onto our cash, and in terms of looking at our overall capital program, there may be no cash impact at all net. So certainly we can pay our bills as and when they fall due.
Are there any more questions? Well, thank you. Councillor, is somebody to move this, please? All right, Councillor Roberts, and seconded by Councillor Buckley. You were beaten by that much. All right, we shall put this to the vote. Those in favour? Unanimous decision. Thank you. Thank you, Ms Collins. Excuse me. This will be an interesting part of the afternoon for myself. But before we move to the actual proposals and the motion, could I ask Mr. Trevor Caithness to come forward to give his presentation on part of this next package? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, councillors, for this opportunity, and staff. I'm here representing Gippsland Agricultural Group and also farmers of the region of Gippsland, Central and East Gippsland. Most of you would know Gippsland Agricultural Group is a group that has been formed now for about 5 months. It's a farmer-driven group of research-minded farmers looking to develop a research farm on the buffer land of the Bairnsdale Aerodrome site. So there is a substantial area of land there owned by the Shire, which the Gippsland Agricultural Group will be taking over the lease of as of April 1, all being well. The organisation, as you can see, is requesting some funds from your council budget here of $40,000 for part of stage 1 of the development of that research farm. Stage 1 will be where the basics of getting some fencing and some infrastructure and some reticulated water through the site happens. And we've been very fortunate that Wellington Shire has come on board and actually already submitted $40,000 into the research farm. And the state government, Victorian state government, has contributed $400,000 to the development of the research farm. So we're at the cusp of something very, very exciting happening here in East Gippsland with this research farm. It will be a place of learning for farmers. It will be a place of trialling of new crops. Anything that farmers may have that they wish to come with an idea to actually trial that they wouldn't be naturally doing on their own farms, but they could do it through this research farm. The research farm had its first field day back on October 30 and had over 70 farmers from everywhere from Yarram to Orbost to Relgan to Walgolmerang a turn up. So that was a terrific success. I would just applaud you to support this $40,000 out of your budget to go into this stage 1 of the research farm. There will be a stage 2 and a stage 3, which will be coming next year, but we do certainly have to get these basics here first. I see that you're going to be moving on to the situation of the drought potential funding to come and help with the rates for farmers through regional East Gippsland. And I guess I just want to just encourage you to think about rate relief as perhaps not so much supporting your farmers, but actually supporting your whole community. Because I can assure you that if a farmer actually gets to save $5,000 out of his rates, that money will actually get spent in the region. That'll get spent through the local businesses. That will mean that cars will get serviced that are way overdue for having a service. Wives might get a chance of getting a new kitchen table. There will be money spent through the region. So perhaps don't think of it so much as supporting farmers, but actually it's a way of actually being able to support the whole community. Because that money will circulate, I can assure you. There's no farmer I know that knows how to hang on to money. We all spend it. And so it's just what happens. So I'd just like to take this chance to just thank you for hearing me and your time and your proposed support. So thank you.
Thank you, Trevor. Would there be some questions from councillors? Councillor Buckley.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This buffer area, this is not directly to you, it's more through to our administration. I take it it's to my knowledge that was the same area where Matt Yule had the idea of an air park. Yeah, all of that. Well, that's been written off our books, or there's no more action on that. It's just completely disappeared, I take it, Mr. CEO.
I think we could refer to Ms Weigel to answer that question. It's probably in her field. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and Councillor Buckley. As councillors would be aware, we're currently undertaking a master plan for the airport site, which is considering the airport use and use of a range of tenancies, including the tenancy that is there around farming systems at the moment. So this is being considered as part of that development of the master plan. The exact location of the trial sites would be left until after we've determined the master planning. We're expecting the first draft of that by the end of this calendar year. So it won't hold up this project at all because it will be considered as part of that draft master plan. There is certainly some land there that is surplus to requirements. There's probably land in other nearby parcels that is surplus to council's requirement as well, that we could also consider about as a potential location for this trial. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Weigel. Councillor Ellis, you've got a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got two questions. Just one is in supporting our presenter. He's obviously got a business plan coming forward, which we've seen the draft of, and he's told us today that he wants to get started by the 1st of April. Now, we've got this consultancy coming through, and we don't know what's in it. What if, and it's a what if question, what if the consultants turn around and say there should be no tenants? God forbid, I'd hate to front the drag club having said this, but what if the consultant said, look, we don't think any tenancy of any sort should be on the airfield? How is that possible, and how would this group adjust to that situation? To you, Fiona, or perhaps our guest on that one.
I don't think I'm not expecting or anticipating that that's what the master plan would say. However, the master plan would come to council for consideration and adoption, and council could consider some changes to the master plan based on their local intelligence and local need. As I've also indicated, council does own other property in the area that may be available or partially available for use such as this. So I think it's, yes, we need to wait until we know what the master plan is saying, but I don't anticipate that the master plan will say no other tenancies. There may be a restriction on the area that can be used and the type of tenancies, including things like building heights or lack of buildings and the fencing materials that are used. I'm anticipating there will be more of that sort of advice rather than no tenancies at all. However, if that is the case, and if in reading the master plan we consider that that's a viable recommendation, we would then work with this group and other tenants to find other alternate locations in the nearby facility.
So there's some flexibility for both parties.
If I could, the stage one of this development is the area adjacent to the Ben Warden Road, which is effectively the furthest area of the airport land away from the runways, and the area that is the furthest away from the tarmac and the activity area of the airport. So I have spoken with the consultants myself. They've interviewed us, and we've discussed it quite openly, and there's been a general feeling that the activities that we are looking at in that remote area of the site would not be of impact to their future plans. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm taking advantage of yourself as a representative of the farming community, and you've referred to the distribution of this $1.5 million the council's been given as a rate subsidy. Now, without going into definitions of farmers, we could say that there is 3,000 farmers here in the East Gippsland region, but only a smaller figure are actually full-time farmers in the sense that they don't work off-farm. How do you see, from your perspective, the fairest distribution of that monies to the farming community, taking into account what you've already told me?
Great question, Councillor Ellis. I think it's an area that perhaps ideally we would actually be only having the rate subsidy on those that are registered primary producers. But if that is too complicated for the Shire to actually work through the process, I don't actually see that it is a problem if perhaps some hobby farmers and such do get a little bit of a free kick through it and actually do get a small amount of reduction off their rates. Because again, I think that money will just circulate back into the economy. And I think that's the important thing to acknowledge, is that generally when people have a saving somewhere within their annual budget, they'll actually spend it within their economy. And I think that's the positive that we need to sort of hang on through this whole process, is actually allowing this to be a stimulant to put more money through our economy. Thank you.
Councillor Peltz, you have a question?
Yes, I have, and it's of Fiona with regards to it. But first of all, I want to just clarify something for Trevor here. It's Trevor, isn't it? Just the fact that council doesn't, it's not a tax department, and we don't have the privilege of looking at businesses' paperwork, so we have no idea about that. We do not have the capacity to judge a property or a business on its merit of being a viable farming equity. So to keep that in mind, the only justification we have as councillors, as a council, is property ratings. So the only advantage we can actually base ourselves on is their rates of their property and the volume that it is. So that's the only guidelines we have. So just to point that clearly out to the public. And Fiona, can you just point out a point of clarification, please? In your last comment, you actually stated that the aerodrome report was due to be finalised by the end of the financial year, but the bottom line is I thought I was under the impression that it was coming to council February next year, and you've just pushed the date out by another 6 months. That's all. I just needed a point of clarification on that, because we were keen to see that early in the new year, given the fact that there's people and businesses wanting to know what's happening in this space, and they've been put on hold for quite some time now. And, you know, they're all waiting to hear a bit of news about the aerodrome. Thank you.
My apologies if I said financial year.
You
I
did.
certainly meant calendar year.
Calendar year is
So
acceptable.
we're expecting that the draft would be received by December, and it would be coming to council in February.
Thank you. Oop, turn myself off.
So if there are no more questions, I would like to ask our Deputy Mayor, Councillor Buckley, to come and please take the chair as I'm declaring.
Thank
Oh,
you.
sorry. Yes, thank you very much for travelling down, and thank you for that address.
And Mr Mayor, I myself, given the fact that I have a property that could be attached to advantage of this, I'd like to declare a conflict of interest and revoke my voting right and leave the room. I have.
That is your decision, and we accept that, and thank you very much for that declaration.
No worries.
As I was about to say, also being from a farm, please, coming from a farm myself, I would wish to declare a conflict of interest, unfortunately, but I would not want to be involved in the debate where it could be seen that I was taking advantage. So I'd like Councillor Buckley, please, to come forward for item 5.1.4. Thank you.
Save us shuffling around. I can do it from here. I can sit here, can't I? Instead of relocating. It'd be good to get it for next
No, I'm very happy with that, because I was trying to clean up my mess here and I thought he's going to step on my glasses case. So yes, stay where you are. That's great.
Mr Mayor, very late. I mean, I own a property in Cahoon Road, Lakes Entrance, and I think that's still. I can't think of my rating category, whether it's rural, residential, or farming. So, when in doubt, I best walk out. I had thought that. No, but I don't know what it's rated as. I've got a doubt in my mind. I hadn't thought of it until Councillor Peltz raised. Yeah, Councillor Rates. Councillor Peltz raised her concern, and I've never seen her consider her property to be acting for. So I'll declare a conflict just in case.
I can accept that. Excuse me, councillors, please. You have. I just was doing the numbers. We have 5. That is a quorum, as I understand. So we still have. It would be a dreadful situation if we didn't have a quorum, but we do. So we have 5. So I'll hand over to you, Councillor Buckley. Thank you.
Okay, now this is the working through 5.1.4, and we have a recommendation here. Who's the administrator to? Thank you, Liz. If you'll will carry on with this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. As councillors are aware, the Victorian Government, the Premier came recently announced a local government support services payment for East Gippsland Shire of $1.51 million. The funding agreement has been executed, and we expect to receive those funds shortly into our bank account. The criteria around that funding has very much been left to council's discretion, and the only stipulation is that it needs to be simple and administratively easy in terms of how we deal with that. Councillors have listened to the rural community over recent times in terms of the farming community's call for rate relief, and council considered a number of options recently in terms of what that might look like. The report today provides a recommendation in terms of the allocation of those funds towards a rate relief payment to all the farm assessment, the properties in our rating database that are classed as farming properties, and they have to meet a certain criteria in terms of whether they are a farm property or not. So all of those properties that meet that criteria, which are just over 2,700 rating assessments, would be included in if the recommendation was adopted, in a proportional apportionment of the 19-20 year current general farm rate, and that would be then processed as a credit through to the rates owing by each of those properties for rates. Also, there is a second part to this report. There is a recommendation in terms of amending the allocation which council had previously adopted for the allocation of the council $500,000 budget, given recent drought funding that's been made available, and that's all included in the report as well. So there is a recommendation, Mr. Deputy Mayor, for council's consideration. Thank you very much.
Deputy Mayor, if I may, I'd like to propose an amendment to the recommendation, and I'd need a seconder for that.
Thank you, Councillor Reid. Have we got a seconder for the amendment? Councillors? Please read the amendment. Please read the amendment, Councillor Reid.
Yep, thank you. Thank you. Yep, there we are. Okay. So at the moment, the proposal in the recommendation .1 suggests that the 1.5 million is proportionally allocated based on CIV and the capital improved value. And if this was applied, the relief range would be from $1 to $11,000 across the Shire, with an average rate relief of 553. What I'm proposing is an alternative that proposes that every property receive a 50% rate relief up to a maximum amount of $670 per assessment. This option would remove the extremes of the rate relief through applying a ceiling on the upper limit of the rate relief and be a much more equitable and reasonable allocation of the 1.5 million, in my view, it would apply more rate relief to more people who more likely need that support, rather than the big players who are going to get $10,000 or $11,000. It would apply a rate relief across the Shire more equitably to the hard-working middle farmers in the centre of our Shire.
Thank you, Councillor Reeve. Now, have we got a seconder for that amendment? Thank you. Have we? Is somebody going to second that amendment? We haven't got an... Well, it's, thank you very much for that, Councillor Reeve, but your amendment has lapsed. Thank you. Now we go on.
Yes, Mr Deputy Mayor, can I please move the recommendation as stated in the agenda? I'm happy to move it.
Thank you. And we got a seconder. Yes, Councillor Roberts. Thank you very much for that. Okay, now you wish to speak to the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Buckley. I've been really looking forward to this meeting to have this recommendation put up by Council. As we know, the Shire has advocated very extensively throughout the year for rate relief. That's what we heard from the community consistently, that rate relief would be the best and most effective way to assist them during this time. Council isn't in a position to offer the rate relief. We made it very clear that this would have to come from the state, and through our advocacy, the state have responded in giving these funds to Council, and the recommendation in place is the best way to distribute these funds. It's relative to what each farmer pays on their notice, and it's simple, effective, which is the criteria that the state provided us with, so effectively a 30% discount. It's consistent with Wellington Shire, who passed it last week, and it ensures that consistency across the two municipalities who we have worked closely with during this time of drought. And as we heard from Trevor, the money saved on the rates will be used to pay other bills and shop locally. So we will see that flow-on effect to the smaller business who we know are also suffering in our community. And in relation to the breakdown of funds to the relevant agencies, we know that they will distribute that money to who needs it most, and we know that they have been working thoroughly throughout this drought, helping those most in need. And to Trevor and the Gippsland Agricultural Group on their work so far, congratulations, and it's fantastic to see, and I look forward to seeing what comes of the research farm. So I commend this recommendation to all councillors.
Yeah. I take it this one can stay on. Well, yeah, thank you. We any other speakers in favour? Thank you, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Deputy. While I don't have anything prepared, I would like to reiterate the statements of the councillor to my left, and I just would like to say, O'Connell, I would like to say the council had a lot of robust discussion about the best use of allocating these funds, and the common theme around it was simplicity and to be direct and to get it in the bank accounts of the farmers that are most affected, and instead of complicating it with red tape, just inject it straight back into the community. So it's great to see that we can get such a quick turnaround and see the effects immediately.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Now, have we got anyone speaking against the motion? Okay. Well, that being the case, we have a quorum left. Say again? Oh, thank you for the reminder.
Yeah, so despite my initial, Deputy Mayor, my initial proposal, I certainly support the allocation of the funds. There's no doubt about that. I had an alternative way of distributing it. But this is important. We couldn't have done it without state and federal government support. They have the greatest capacity to raise funds compared to us, and thank goodness that they've been seen the way forward to distribute that to us so we can distribute it to our communities.
Yeah. Thank you. So we don't need any rights of reply or anything. Anybody else want to have a word? You might as well, there's only a few here.
I might as well, Mr Deputy Mayor. This funding has been the result of a lot of work and advocating for, on behalf of our communities, from our most recent Mayor, Councillor O'Connell, and she is to be commended for the work that she did in regards to ensuring that we got this funding from state government. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much for that. So now I'll put it all to the vote. All those in favour? There we go. No one's against. And thank you very much. All right, the others can come back in. That was a bit easier than I thought. Oh, better.
Thank you, Thank you, Councillor Buckley, for doing that for me. Now we have 5.1.5, our local government rating system review, and we have again Ms Collins. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As councillors are aware, the Minister for Local Government appointed a panel to undertake a review of the Victorian local government rating system, and a number of councillors attended a meeting with the panel, representatives of the panel, as well as the community consultation session on the 3rd of October. The submissions were required to be lodged by the 1st of November, and that didn't allow time for the submission, council submission, to be brought to a formal council meeting prior to having to lodge it with the panel. So this report is seeking retrospective endorsement of the submission that was lodged on behalf of council to the rating system review. So I take the report as read, and there's a recommendation there. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Collins. Councillors, do you have any questions? Okay, no questions. We have Councillor Reeves has moved the motion and Councillor Toohey has seconded it.
Too slow.
Just too slow. So, Councillor Reeves, would you like to speak? Councillor Toohey?
No, thank you.
All right, no other speakers. I put it to the vote. All those in favour? We have a unanimous decision. Thank you, Ms Collins. Now this is 5.2 for strong communities. We have 5.2.1, dogs in public space, trial off-leash areas. So I would suggest that...
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
You're going to speak to it, and your officers will also support you. Thank you.
Yes. So as requested by council, we've brought before you a report for a trial of some off-leash areas for dogs, and I'll introduce Elka Taplin and Leah McLeod to just briefly introduce this item to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. In October last year, Council resolved to designate 2 off-leash areas pursuant to Section 26 of the Domestic Animals Act, which provides Council the opportunity to determine how dogs and cats are restrained in public places. At that time, officers were asked to investigate further options for how dogs can interact with the community in the future, and a reference group was formed early this year to discuss this. 12 representatives from across the Shire were asked what parameters determine whether a public space should be on leash or off leash in your community. Feedback from the reference group and from internal stakeholders have been incorporated into the order you see before you today. The purpose of this report is to seek council resolution to make a new order for dog on and off leash areas within the municipality, which will be trialled, reviewed and evaluated after a 6-month period. The new order will maintain current requirements for dogs to be kept on leash when exercised on roads and footpaths in built-up areas, defined as those within speed zones of 60 kilometres per hour or less, yet enable greater freedom for pet owners to walk their dogs off leash in council-owned and managed parks, recreation reserves and outside township areas. Beaches and foreshores, which are council managed, will also be on leash but will be reviewed, and some may be determined to be suitable as off-leash areas in the future. Existing restrictions on dogs in national parks and similar Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning managed reserves remain, and this will also be included in the Education and Communications Plan. The need to have a dog under effective control is equally important whether on or off leash, and under the order, a dog is deemed to be under effective control if the dog is under the control of someone capable of restraining it. Just being on a leash does not mean a person has effective control of a dog. Responsibility for a dog's behaviour remains with the owner, and effective control must be maintained whether a dog is on or off leash. All laws currently controlling dogs in a public place will still apply, and that includes dogs wandering at large or not being securely confined, attacking people or other animals, and it also includes not picking up after dog litter or disposing of it appropriately. Data from the past 2 years of the types of complaints, or these types of complaints for dog issues, have been reviewed, and research papers published nationally and internationally have also been studied to better understand dog and human behaviour and interaction. This has also influenced the proposal, and much of the findings around these complaints will be incorporated into extensive education and communication resources for the implementation of the order. The facts are that wandering dogs are the cause of 80% of dog attacks reported to council annually. That's dogs out on the street and parks without their owners to control them and without owners to pick up after them. The benefits of council providing more places for dogs in public for dogs to be off leash is that they will be with an owner or with somebody who's in charge of them and someone responsible for them. There are also many benefits, improving the health of dogs and people and improving safety in public places for the community. It will create more content and socially acceptable pets, and by reducing nuisance behaviours such as digging and barking and wandering, it'll be a better community. Thank you.
Thank you, Elka. Now just open up for questions, councillors. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This may be directed at Mr. McConnell. We discussed during our one of our meetings, we were discussing the 20-metre perimeter around barbecues and playgrounds. Was that something that was added to the recommendation, or did it remain as recommended initially?
So the original draft material that you saw specified 10 metres, which is used in a number of other councils, and after discussions that was increased to 20 metres.
Thank you.
Councillor Peltz, yes.
If I may have a follow-up on that question, what was the basis as to why it was extended, the justification?
Borrow someone else's microphone. It's okay. There's a range of figures that have been used by different councils for that purpose, and 10 metres in other places is sometimes used as a prohibition within a certain distance of playgrounds, etc. The increase to 20 metres was in response to feedback in the discussions with councillors in terms of just providing some additional space, given that dogs can cover territory pretty quickly if they want to. So it just gives a little bit of additional space in which there's time to react if a dog is seeking to enter an area that's too close to a playground.
With regards to the 6-month review, which I'll be excited to see, because it'll be curious as to whether this is going to work or not. Are those sorts of things up for adjustment? Should we require the committee to review that and have a look at, you know, the potential of twerking the guidelines that we have in place?
Absolutely. So, tweaking. Yes, we can tweak the. So, at any time in a meeting, councillors can resolve to make a new order in amended terms, and so whether it be in the short term, if something arises that we need to respond to, or indeed at the 6-month review point, council can consider the feedback, and if there is need to increase, decrease a distance, we may, for example, have identified by then some appropriate locations for swimming that we want to identify, etc. So there are those opportunities at that time to make a change and to see that reflected in the order.
We have some more questions. So, Councillor Roberts, you have another question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The question I was going to ask was, with additional dogs off leash, now I'm aware that it's still the dog needs to be under control, but do you foresee any additional resources required for provisioning of rangers to ensure that everything is okay? I'm not sure what the current number of rangers on duty is at any given time in any given area, but there is a potential that there may be additional resources required.
We're not anticipating that at this stage. That's something we can review through the trial. And I go back to one of the points that Elka made in the introduction, is that many of the issues that we identify with dogs in this attacking or other interference with people or other animals occurs where the dog has escaped or similar, or is at large, you know, from their property, more so than when they're off lead, being deliberately taken off lead for exercise in a park area.
Councillor Reeves, you'd like to ask a question?
Yeah, thanks, Ms McLeod, Ms Tapley, Mr McConnell. My question is rather specific around designated on-leash beaches and foreshore areas. So I just have reread this document, and it says quite specifically that between 1 November and 30 April, dogs are not permitted at all on those beaches as listed. Is that correct, or not permitted to be off-leash? Because by my reading, if I may indulge you, dogs are not permitted to remain in a public reserve area or bathe or swim in the water adjoining a public reserve between 1 November and 30th April. Goodness me, is that really the case?
So there's two things I might say in respect of that. So that is, those provisions which are reflected in this order are the same provisions that sit within the local law. So they've been reflected here without modification at this stage, in part for absolute clarity. We don't want one law of council saying one thing and another law of council saying another thing. That's the first thing. The second thing is it turns on how we apply the word remain. And Elka, do you want to just outline how that is applied in practice by our staff in ensuring compliance with the
Certainly. You'll see from signage that's located on these beach and foreshore reserves that are attached to the foreshores, the signage actually states that dogs cannot remain in the area, so they can pass through but not remain. So the intention is that you can still walk through with the dog on a lead through these areas, but the intention is that it's during a busy time of year for our tourists and visitors and residents utilising the waterways, that we don't want dogs getting in with the same watering areas, swimming with people at the same time. So the intention is that they can still walk through, but they can't remain in the area. And that's how it's been interpreted and applied at the moment.
And I might add, those areas which are designated are the most popular, typically the more popular areas, and probably the most archetypal of that is the 200 metres either side of the footbridge at Lakes Entrance.
So councillors, by that, it would exclude a young family with a small pet that went down to the beach to sit on the beach for a day with a bucket and spade and the dog because they're remaining at the beach.
Strictly that's the case, and that is already the case. That is already the case in law, and the opportunities to move promptly to a trial are limited with the local law and the extended period it takes to amend the local law. So if at the end of this process we step through a process and we're clear about how it is that we want to manage these issues into the future, the sort of circumstance that you outline could be actively considered to say, is that something that we want to include at that time? But the limitation about potential conflict with the local law, in my view, limits our ability to do that here and now as part of the trial.
That could be twerked.
Thank you so much for that clarification. I think that is something that I think our residents should be aware of. And those young families with that small pet will be moving through that area and not staying on the beach. And without having to write a tax act, I think that's what would result. So, but thanks for that clarification. And thanks for the judgment of the rangers too in applying those laws, I think.
Councillor O'Connell has a question also. It's a popular topic, this one.
Just in relation to the areas which will be classified on leash, will you be putting up new signage there so that it's quite clear? Because I mean, the message that will come out of this, if it's passed, is that we're now off leash, with certain areas. But I mean, the message will probably get lost in that people will just be happy that it's off leash. But there's obviously certain areas, whether it's beaches, swimming holes, parks, that need to be managed. And I'm thinking in the more outlying centres where we don't have the rangers all the time. I mean, I know you're spreading yourself thin as it is. Just how that will sort of be managed.
If I may, the response to that. Sorry, thank you. The response to that would be that we've tried to keep the order as simple in wording and interpretation as possible, because misinterpretation, particularly of what we currently have with our beaches and foreshores, were actually promoted on some wiki sites as being pet friendly between the 1st of November and 30th of April. So that's definitely one of the things which is really key for us, is to keep it simple. We are currently on leash everywhere rather than, as opposed to just the 2 designated areas. So the on leash provisions won't be signposted as much, because what is actually out in the community at the moment is saying that you need to be on leash. But yes, we do have communications plan and some education planned already around the installation of signage to designate the off-leash areas through parks. Yes.
Councillor Ellis, so you wanted to ask a question also?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Councillor O'Connell's actually asked the main question, which, this is a decades-old issue, off-leash and on-leash issues for all the main beaches running from Lakes through to Malakuta. So if we've got the appropriate signage, we're okay. So I'm not going to ask you a question, but I'm going to ask Fiona a question. Can you tell me when the off-leash park at Lakes Entrance will actually be opened for the community of Lakes Entrance to use, please? I was down there the other day and didn't see anyone bogged.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. We have contractors in there at the moment. The park will be open in early December.
That is good news.
Yes. Councillor Buckley. Councillor Buckley, we've got Councillor Peltz has moved the motion, which I expected she would have shot her hand up very quickly for that, and Councillor Roberts has seconded it. So do you wish to speak?
I'm really delighted to move this motion because it's been a really long time in coming. I would think about the better part of 5 years, we have endeavoured to request our officers to work towards this point, and we've finally got to this stage now. So I really commend the officers and Stuart and the Rangers to be getting this to this stage, because they're really not the reason why this project's been held up as to this stage now, and I'd really like to thank them for their diligent work on this matter, and look forward to seeing the 6-monthly report, and hopefully a whole lot of happy paws and waggly tails over this one, and I think it's a really good initiative for our community, particularly coming into the tourist season, that they that people are able to bring their pets and enjoy our facilities in and around the region, and travellers and you know, tourists coming through feel that they can stop and stay a few nights. So thank you, and I commend to all councillors. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. Now, Councillor Roberts, you would like to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this is, to reiterate Councillor Peltz, I think this is really important. It's been a long time coming, and a really positive outcome, and hopefully our pet owners will remain responsible, and we'll get something really positive out of it, and I look forward to seeing the results of the review in 6 months' time, so it's great.
Do we have any other councillors wish to speak?
Sorry, just as a right of reply.
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you. I'd just like to reiterate to the public that it still is a responsible dog ownership, as Councillor Roberts stated, and you know, we still want this to be a positive trial period, and people that are not responsible with their pets will be really disappointed if there's any issues that would upset this whole process. So people do understand responsible pet ownership. I know they'll do the right thing and make this a positive trial period for us, and yeah, bring it on. Thank you.
Well, I think at this stage we can put this to the vote. All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. It's a unanimous decision, and thank you, ladies, and thank you, Stuart, for that. Well done.
Thank you, you two, Bree. Appreciate
it. This is 5.3.1, which is adoption of the draft Eagle Point Marine and Coastal Management Plan. So we have our officers here to talk to this, and thank you, Aaron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I've got my colleague Nicole Reynolds with me today, who's the Strategic Planning Coordinator, because Nicole has gone through a very long process with this particular project, and she deserves the opportunity to present to Council, in my view. Councillors, in short, we're seeking the adoption of the draft Eagle Point Marine and Coastal Management Plan. It's gone through significant reiterations, significant consultation, and it's an area that's very important for the Eagle Point Township. On that basis, I'm going to pass over to Nicole to go through a few of the brief points of the plan, and we'll be happy to answer questions at the end.
Thank you, Ms Reynolds, and I do appreciate, I know how much work you've put into this and how passionate you've been, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I'm very pleased to be presenting this item to the table this afternoon. As Mr Hollow has indicated, the purpose today is to seek your adoption of the Coastal Management Plan for the Eagle Point Township, and to note the attached business plan, which is part of the Coastal Management Act requirements, that we also have an attached document in the form of a business plan. Our Coastal Management Plan is a 10-year plan, and it is part of our responsibilities as Committee of Management over a significant amount of the urbanised section of the foreshore. This proposed recommendation before you today follows the recent adoption of the Eagle Point Structure Plan, and these plans sit very well and aligned with one another. Part of the purpose of this plan is to affirm the community's aspirations in relation to the public land component of the township. The draft plan also includes a concept landscape master plan, and you may recall that 2 options were presented to the community, and part of our consultation process asked the community to vote on the 2 options, and before you today we are proposing a recommendation that you adopt option 1 in relation to the very exciting community hub activity node on the foreshore. As I said, the community consultation occurred between September and November last year in conjunction with the structure plan. Written submissions have been considered and have formed part of the recommendation today. Just to reiterate, the business plan forms part of our responsibilities under the Act, and it itemises our priorities and our responsibilities. I do emphasise that the items proposed in the business plan are subject to Council's normal budget and processing processes. So again, in summary, it is our pleasure to present to you today for adoption the Eagle Point Coastal Management Plan. We are seeking you to note the business plan. We are seeking you to adopt the concept landscape master plan for the redevelopment of the Eagle Point foreshore. We are also seeking your permission to refer the coastal management plan and the business plan to DELP for endorsement. And we are reaffirming that we are noting that the priority items contained within the business plan will be subject to your further budget considerations. And I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you for that. And first question from Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As this is a 10-year management plan, I believe this will probably have some interaction with the draft marine coastal policy that's being considered at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Yes, it will. And we have made submissions to the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning in relation to the importance of these strategic plans with reference in the preparation to the importance of these plans retaining recognition as part of our management of the foreshores.
So to clarify, you received responses from DELP?
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. We have had the privilege of a delegation of senior bureaucrats from the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning who have attended our offices, and we have discussed specifically the importance of these strategic plans in addition to many other issues that we've raised in our submissions. We were able to come away from that meeting with some comfort that we are being heard and that the importance of these strategic plans as part of community processes is embedded in going forward.
That's great news.
Do we have any further questions? Councillor Peltz.
Yes, can I just have a clarification from you on your map? It says the area highlighted A on your coastal plans. I was just curious as to what further development you had in that section. It's the bit that is adjacent to the river.
Thank you, Councillor Peltz. I'm referring to page 24, which is Precinct A, which we've nominated as the Mitchell River. So it has a boat ramp and a small amenities facility. And we've put in the bracket that it's a natural area. So the vision is to retain, essentially as a fishing area, Councillor Peltz, and to recognise the significant environmental values of that precinct being on the silt jetties. Yeah. So essentially the recommendation is would be to prepare and implement a small master plan to work through future plans with reference to this precinct, having regard for retaining those environmental values.
Can I just have a clarification there? I know there's a lot of houses along there that have private jetties, and I'm just curious as to whether they would be told to pull them down, or would they be harmed in any? Would they come into this idea at all?
Thanks, Councillor, for your question. No, they won't be, and they won't be affected by this plan.
Okay, thanks very much.
So if we have no more questions, could we have somebody to move this? So we have Councillor Peltz has moved it, Councillor Toohey seconded it. So you wish to speak to the motion, Councillor Peltz?
Look again, Nicole, congratulations on getting to this point. You've worked diligently on this one and really hard. There's been a lot of hurdles. I hope that the people in the area that had issues with regards to this are now satisfied and that they will be able to deal with what the implementation of these plans actually will have. So I'm really pleased to see this go ahead and looking forward to some funding coming their way quickly for this to start getting to the stage where we're actually doing some work. So thank you very much to you and your staff, and yeah, well done.
Councillor Toohey, would you like to reply?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This will be a huge improvement on what's there. It's a fairly tired area down there and certainly needed some work. I know there has been a lot of work put into this, and I really look forward to seeing the outcome, because from what I can see on paper it looks fantastic, and the community down there will benefit a great deal from having a much more up-to-date and impressive area with which visitors can enjoy as well. So thanks.
Do we have anyone else wishing to speak for this?
This project here that's about to be reviewed or accepted also stands in line with the council's township upgrade policy. So it's another progression, another town off our list. So we've done, you know, we've done Paynesville, we've done Lakes Entrance, we've done Orbost, and so this will be another progressive development. So it's a really exciting movement, and plus we've got Nicholson and Swanreach and the towns on the highway. So it is an exciting time, and it's great to see council being able to refreshen these communities and give them a bit more life, you know, into the 20th century. So thank you. 21st, where are we? 21st century. Thank you.
Do we have anybody else that wishes to speak or speak against? Can't now, sorry. Oh, she's helping me. She's helping me. All right, well, I think we can put this to the vote. So all those in favour? A unanimous decision. Thank you, officers. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
5.3.2, which is our Capital Works and Landfill Rehabilitation Projects report for 2019 for the quarter ended 30th of September, and I would expect that Ms Weigel will speak to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. This is a regular report that comes to Council to provide you with progress on our Capital Works program. It is a companion report to the report that's already been prepared and presented by Ms Collins. This just gives a little bit more detail around some of the capital projects and where we're sitting in the program. As councils are aware, we have a very large and ambitious capital program this year, with the adopted budget and carry forwards totalling $53.9 million and representing 167 individual projects. As at the end of September, we had actual expenditure of $5.66 million and committed expenditure of $11.91 million. When we look at that as a percentage of the Capital Works program that was either delivered or in delivery, that's 32% of the program. The report goes on to detail where we have introduced new projects into the program. Often they are just the breaking down of our program budgets, programs like the Road Reseal program, which are large multi-million-dollar projects, programs. We will now introduce those into individual projects such as Day Street and Bairnsdale. We've also identified where we would be replacing bridges, and where we've introduced new projects based on funding received. We also have identified a couple of projects that we won't be able to deliver this year around our IT systems, and so have identified them already for carry forward to the 2021 financial year. To offset that and to balance that, we have identified where we can bring some projects forward from the 2021 year to the 1920 year and deliver those, which are 4 new bridges, and also some more of the funding for the Macmillan Street and Phillips Lane reconstruction project that is under contract at the moment and is identified to be delivered over 2 financial years. I'm happy to take any questions on the report. Thank you.
No question? Yeah, yes, Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Weigel, just a point of clarity on the budget adjustments. Can you please explain what that was, what the reasoning for that, and what they might have been? I may be misinterpreting the report, but by looking at the initial adjusted budget, adopted budget of 50.9 million.
So when the budget went to council, it had an series of identified carry forwards in there. When we then looked at projects post adoption of the budget, there was $3.9 million of projects that were under contract that we'd anticipated making the final payment on prior, or another payment prior to the end of financial year. Those payments weren't made on, so that was that additional $3.3 million of adjustment, so it was additional carry forwards from the 18-19 year to 19-20.
Still on anyway. And then there was an additional adjustment for Q1 up to 54.7, so an additional 800,000, correct?
Correct, that was grant funding. So as we get grant funding into the program, it's reflected in here as well. So there was some grant funded projects that were not anticipated in the original budget as adopted.
Mr. Mayor, if there are no other questions, this is a quarterly report, and as such, as there are no other questions, I'd like to move that the recommendation to council be adopted.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Buckley. All right, we'll put this to the vote, and all those in favour? Unanimous decision. Thank you, Ms. Weigel. That brings us to urgent and other business.
Right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 2 matters to bring to council's attention as urgent and other business. Neither are in precedence, but I would like to start firstly with a matter flagged earlier by Director McConnell in this meeting. And that is this, simply, councillors, as flagged earlier in the meeting by manager, I should say, Stuart McConnell, as the result of the adoption of the amendments to the representative structure of the Economic Development Advisory Board, a vacancy exists for a councillor representative on that advisory board, and that the position needs to be filled as a matter of urgency due to the fact that the advisory board is to meet before the end of the month. As such, and noticing the importance of this board, I ask that the appointment of a councillor be admitted as a matter of urgent and other business, and I have prepared a motion to support this request. So firstly, Mr. Mayor, I ask that the matter be admitted as a matter of urgent and other business. Urgent business.
Do we have
happy to second that. We did it earlier, yeah.
Oh, beg your pardon. Okay, thank you, Councillor Pilts. My motion to council is that council appoint Councillor Natalie O'Connell as council's representative on the Economic Development Advisory Board.
Keep status quo.
That's the motion I put before council.
Okay, so could ask Councillor O'Connell. Do,
because he was already appointed in the previous meeting. We've chanted you were there as the mayor. So, and what I'm saying, I'm wanting to show fairness and neutrality and recognising your good work. It's not a personal issue.
It's a formality.
So,
if you want to start, if you don't want to, that's another council name. It's up to you. That's what that was the very purpose of this particular motion.
Yeah, I'll decline. Sorry.
okay, so Councillor O'Connell has declined. Do we have any other nominations or anyone who would like to put their hand up to be on that board?
Mayor, I think that I nominate you as the Mayor, that you should be in that position.
It's up to him.
That's a difficult point. I thought from this that we might be say getting the people who were right for the job to be on that job. I don't know that is my strong point. Can go on the advisory board, but as I said, I feel that there are other councillors who are stronger in this area than I would be. So if there's somebody else that would really.
Business experience.
I would nominate Joe. Sadly,
But he's on it.
Job going begging.
Yeah, I don't mind, I'll do it.
Well, thank you, Councillor Peltz, because as I said, I believe this. That is not a strong point of mine, and I would hope that we can around the table fill all the positions that are available with the right people. So, at this stage, you are the nominated member.
Thanks,
Madam,
Mr. Mayor. If I can come back and
Mr.
bring
Mayor,
this
we
back
need to
into
vote.
into order now that we have a nominee. So the motion before council is that council appoint Councillor Mary Ann Peltz as council's representative on the Economic Development Advisory Board.
We need a seconder for that. Right, Councillor Buckley. So we'll put that to the vote that Councillor Peltz be appointed. All those in favour? Yeah, why not? It's unanimous. Congratulations, Councillor Peltz, and thank you very much. After that vote, Manager, Mr. O'Connell, would there be any more to add to that, as in terms of who would be the chair of that board?
So I can help that out, Mr. Mayor, in the sense that on other advisory boards, if there are two councillors represented, the two councillors work it out between themselves as to who chairs the meeting, or, often it's not one or the other will volunteer to do the job.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. All right, so on that board we have Councillor Peltz, and Councillor Rotino has retained his position, although he's not here today. Any other urgent business?
Can I move to suspend standing orders so that we may be able to get Mr. Gary Squires back to the table to talk with regards to, is that what we're moving to? With regards to the timber industry announcement last week and its ramifications to this township of Orbost.
perhaps...
All right, well, we need to have a seconder for that.
Well, Councillor Buckley.
Councillor Buckley has seconded it. Do we have somebody to speak? Oh, a question? Councillor Ellis.
Should it be that this process is a process question simply, should I have a matter to be brought before in relation to the issue of the Premier's announcement in terms of the future of the timber industry, should that be admitted first before Mr Squires is invited to speak? It's only a process question. I'm quite happy for him to speak first regardless, but...
I think that, okay, but I think that's, I think that that this would be something to ask our CEO, Mr Basford, if that is following the process.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the local law states that no motion can be considered whilst standing orders are suspended. So we're suspending standing orders in terms of having a discussion about whatever topic, and then you would then go back into, you would reinstate the orders, and then if there was a motion to flow from there, then that would be fine.
Thank you.
So
I move to suspend standing orders to invite Mr Gary Squires to the table to deliver some regional information with regards to the Andrews government's timber decision announced last week. Thank you.
And that was still seconded by Councillor Buckley. Okay. All right, with that, with a mover and a seconder, we need to put that to the vote. So those councillors in favour, that's a unanimous decision. So at this stage, I would ask Mr Squires, please, if he could come forward and address the council group. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak to what is a very serious issue for the Orbost region, the Orbost economy. I'll start off by saying what I've said to a number of people who've asked me about this decision. We have an industry that is sustainable. We have an industry based on a natural resource which is renewable. We have an industry that is carbon neutral, and we're going to get rid of it? Crazy. Anyway, that's my starting point. So, some general comments. First off, I guess you all understand that the Andrews government announcement applies to all the forests east of Melbourne. It's not just East Gippsland. The impacts will vary very much according to the locations. The phase down between now and 2030 will vary according to locations. If there's any good news in it, and there is probably only one bit of good news, it's not going to happen tomorrow. The phase down effectively will start 2024. So all mills, this is a current understanding from what they've said, all mills will operate at their current level till 2024, unless they choose to get out earlier for some reason. For Orbost Township itself, so the best case scenario would be that all or some of the mills operate till 2030. The worst case scenario is that they start phasing down from 2024 and are all gone by 2026. So that's quite a possibility given what licences those people have got in front of them. The impact, I'll go to another point first. The whole process is being sold as a transition from native forest to plantations. That is not correct. It's being in all the press releases, that's what you would be led to understand. The reality is that the sawmills in this part of the world, there are no plantations to transition to. Now, some of you are going to say, I know there are some plantations in the Shire. Yes, and we have some plantations in Combined Bar and up around Bendock, all being grown for pulpwood for export. They're all private plantations being grown for pulpwood for export. There are some pine plantations in the northern part of the Shire, all owned by private companies, either being sold for chip for export or committed to mills in the district up there. So effectively, any talk about transitioning our mills to plantations is not possible. In the press release, the government says that they're starting to plant some trees down Latrobe Valley, 250 hectares. So they'll be ready for Australian paper in about 2030, 32, 35, something like that. But to grow to sawmill size will take them 30 or 40 years. So there are a few very small plantations in the central Gippsland that are being grown for sawlog. One lot of them are owned by a sawmill down there by the name of Radial Timbers, and there's a little bit more owned by one of the private companies. They're already committed those logs. So effectively, there is no new plantations for any of the sawmills in Gippsland to transition to. So what does this mean for Orbost? We did a survey only last year. There are 114 jobs in this district, that's Orbost Marlow district, completely reliant on the industry. So they're people who work in sawmills, work in the bush as logging contractors, work as cartage contractors, or work in big forest. That's the direct job, 114 direct jobs. We then did an exercise of trying to work out how many full-time jobs there were in this district, and we came up with this 114 jobs being almost 25% of all the full-time jobs in Orbost district. Now, on top of that, of course, you've got to look at the flow-on effects. And yeah, you can. Some of you are probably better at economics than I, but you use a multiplication factor of anywhere between 1.5 and 1.8 to work out flow-on jobs. So using a conservative figure of 1.6, it means that over time, 40% of all jobs, all full-time jobs in the district are directly or indirectly related to the money that flows out of the timber industry. So mammoth impacts on the Orbost Township. I haven't done the sums for other towns, but Swifts Creek will be in exactly the same situation, percentages wise. A mammoth blow to their community. Bairnsdale will be impacted, obviously not as big a percentage of their community, but you know, some very significant mills down there. The timber that comes out of East Gippsland also goes to the Oswest drying facility in Bairnsdale, so all those jobs go to. I haven't counted those in my jobs. This was just the direct people in Orbost. So there's another 30 or thereabouts jobs at the Oswest mill in drying facility in Bairnsdale. So this is, you know, very serious stuff for Orbost in particular, Swifts Creek and Bairnsdale. So you know, obviously all in this shire. The government says there's a package of $120 million for the transition process, and you know, going into retraining and all that sort of thing. So people say, well, the displaced workers can be retrained through this process, and no doubt that will happen. There will be some good money to go to retraining, but retraining for what? Yes. So it won't be for retraining for a job in Orbost, because there are no jobs. There are no additional jobs. I'm being very pessimistic now, because there could be a few, but there's not 100 jobs or 150 jobs. So as I say, taking the pessimistic view of where Orbost will finish up in 10 years' time, a big percentage of those 100 jobs lost, 100 plus jobs lost, will be young people who'll say, I need a future for my family, I need to leave the district, I've been retrained, but the skills I've learnt I can only put into practice down in Latrobe Valley or Melbourne or somewhere. And so what we'll have is a further exodus of young people from our district. No doubt there will be some older people who lose their jobs, who are late 50s into their 60s, who'll say, well, I'll retire now, I'll take social services for the rest of my life and I'll stay in the district. But the loss of young people will be, young families, will be very, very significant. We've already seen major impacts of previous cutbacks in the timber industry, and I always use the example of 2 football teams in the town that used to be the best in East Gippsland, down to one team that's won one game in the last 2 years. That's the impact on the young population in our district. What are the answers to this? Oh, I raised one other issue. I did ask the question, what's this mean for firewood? Firewood is a commodity that a large percentage of people in East Gippsland use as their primary heating source. I mean, unless you're in Bairnsdale Lakes or Orbost, you don't have access to natural gas. So you use firewood. You go out the bush and get firewood, or you buy firewood from a local merchant. They hadn't thought about that really, but I said, well, probably something will be put in place, is the answer I got, to allow that to happen in the future. But it's a bit unclear, but you know, it's a real social issue, because these people either have their wood fire, or they get bottled gas, I guess, or they use electricity. We're supposed to be trying to cut back on our electricity usage. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So I guess the other question I would ask then is, governments are saying there's opportunities for government to help new businesses start up, to develop new industries, and you have a look and you say, well, what are those industries? You know, what are the possibilities here? As you know, there's been a number of economic studies done in East Gippsland in the last in the last 20 years, in fact. But the one that was done, Orbost 2020 one, just only a few years ago, it came up with 3 things that Orbost had going for it. One of them was the natural resource, the timber resource. The second was tourism, and the third was an age-friendly concept, so attracting more retirees and so on. So the first one has just been wiped out. We're not going to have a timber industry. We can't do any value adding because there won't be any. We're not allowed to log native forest. The second one is tourism, and obviously there are some possibilities in tourism. But what we've got to realise is that East Gippsland is a low yield tourist market unless you're in Lakes Entrance. Lakes Entrance, it's about restaurants and accommodation. Come further east from Lakes Entrance, it's about camping, bushwalking, car touring, all of which are low yield tourism. One of the figures that we developed a few years ago, in 25 years we lost about 400 jobs in the timber industry through the number of cutbacks that government did to the availability of timber. In that same time, we struggled to find 20 new jobs that had been created in tourism. Now, if that's the sort of percentage, then, you know, if we lose 100 or 200 jobs in the next 10 years, can we create 10 or 15 or 20 jobs in tourism? Perhaps. Perhaps we can. I mean, there's certainly potential in tourism, but it's not potential to 100 and 200 jobs. As you all know, it's extremely seasonal down here. So the third thing that we're left with is age-friendly. Can we actually make this a great place for people to retire to, for sea changes, for tree changes, whatever you like to call them? And one of the advantages of Orbost over the years has been its great hospital service. But we're actually struggling to find doctors now. For instance, we've lost our doctor for delivering babies because there's not enough young people there, so they leave. And so the services get less, so there's less incentive for this to be a place to come as an elderly person. So, the flow-on effects into schools and so on, it's all there. So my summary is, it's a fairly pessimistic one, and I hate being pessimistic. I'm usually a fairly positive person, but I don't see the answer out of this one. We've got to develop some things. We've got to look at some tourism possibilities. Perhaps we can have a great big old age facility here for all the retirees, because housing's going to be cheap, that's for sure.
I'll have to move.
And look, yeah, the age-friendly thing, when we did our Orbost 2020 economic study, I think from memory the figure was for every 15 retirees you get here, you do create another job in the community, so in the hospital or in home care, or physiotherapists and those sorts of things. So that perhaps is a bit of an option for the future. Doesn't help the young side, although the young person may be the carer, may be the nurse. But it's, yeah. So, sorry to be a bit negative, but that's how I'm feeling, and that's certainly how the community's feeling. People that have invested millions of dollars in equipment and so on in very recent years are not feeling very good about the world at present. People that have invested have got mortgages on houses and so on and so forth. Happy to try and answer some questions.
Thank you. The Deputy Mayor trumped me. I was about to say thank you for that, Gary. That is quite a in-depth discussion, quite a respectful discussion about about this situation. It's only a week old, but yeah, we can see some real issues for, as you pointed out, Swifts Creek. That's the employer in town, unless you're at the school or with DELP. It's going to have a very big effect, but there is very little detail at this stage as to terms of timing and who goes first or who lasts longer. So that is what we're hoping will come soon to us, so as we can put a plan around for that. But I thank you. And do we have some questions from the other councillors?
I've got another one. Yeah, the Swift Creek Mill, they appear to get some sort of plantation wood from down country round. I don't know whether it's plantation or not, but back in, you would know whether this is right, Joan Kerner tried to get some pine plantations in the Buxton area and through there on public land, but there was such a fuss that at the time that the government weren't permitted by parliamentary, an act of parliament, to put plantations on public land. Do you remember that? Yes, well, has that been repealed, or can the government now put plantations on what was the state forests and so forth? Do you know?
Now, my understanding is that they certainly can't clear native forest to put plantations down. If they've got Crown land that is cleared, they can certainly put plantations on it.
Yeah, well, the stuff at Buxton was harvested and bulldozed to put the pines in.
That won't happen.
That won't happen.
No,
no, but not the pines are any good.
I mean, the government are saying Vic Forest role is going to change. They're going to become, instead of a harvesting company, they're going to become a plantation company. So they're in charge of planting. The government is saying they're going to have a lot more look at farm forestry type projects to get farmers to put plantations on their land. The Vic Forest will become more of a carbon, what's the word, carbon say? trader, yeah, that's the word. But as you rightly said, Mr. Mayor, the detail is very lacking at present. I mean, this is what happens with policy statements. There's a broad statement, then they work out the detail. We've got to wait for a lot of that.
I would actually ask a question, if I may. Of course, the area's been in drought as well. Do you feel that there's any chance of invigorating the actual rural sector to revitalise the Orbost Township, or is it too late for that also?
One of the, in that Orbost 2020 economic study, they did look at the farming land, and there is one long-term prospect on our river flats, and that would be a vegetable industry. But for that to happen, someone's got to come in with a big amount of money to buy up enough properties to make a viable unit to make it happen. And you know, right now, most of the farmers around here, well, the ones that own their land, they're comfortable. They don't want to invest in vegetable farming. The younger ones are still trying to pay their farms off. So, you know, you're not going to get, I don't think it's a vegetable industry is going to start without some other impetus, which would be, you know, many millions of dollars to buy up a stack of land. It certainly makes a lot of sense as a backup to the Lindenow flats. A couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks earlier with the seasons, you know, there's all sorts of good reasons to have vegetables growing here. But, yeah, it's not... past it.
All right, if we've got no more questions, thank you very much for that, Gary. And and because we've suspended standing orders, we need to return to our...
I hereby, Mr Mayor, reinstate standing orders, please.
Seconded by Councillor Buckley. So all those in favour? That's unanimous. So we'll go to Councillor Ellis's motion, urgent and other business.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As has been just highlighted to us out of sessions and has been widely broadcast around the Gippsland region and the wider state, logging in native forests has been banned by the Premier from 2030. I consider this to have a quite serious impact upon the Shire of East Gippsland's community, its businesses and industry. As such, I would like to bring to the attention of Council this issue as a matter of urgency for discussion and debate, and propose to put forward a motion in relation to the matter. So, Mr Mayor, I ask that this matter be admitted as a matter of urgent business. Thank you. Can I have a seconder?
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. It's seconded by Councillor Buckley.
I'm happy to second that. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, would you like to speak to your...
I think I've put forward the issue. All councils are aware of the urgency of it, so I ask that it be put to the vote.
Accept the motion.
Being admitted, yeah.
That it be tabled.
Yeah, okay.
Okay then, thanks for that assistance. All right, well, we have a mover and a seconder,
Yeah,
so put that to the vote. All
Yeah,
those...
have Councillor Ellis moved it and Councillor Buckley seconded it.
Yes, we did point that out. So, so we'll go to the vote. All those in favour?
Thank you. Thank you.
I will abstain. Mr Mayor, I would like to disclose a conflict. Can you turn your two off, please? No. Mr Mayor, I'd like to disclose a conflict of interest with regards to the matter, in the fact that we have a transport business which could be considered affected by this motion, so I would like to remove myself from voting rights on this matter. I hate to do so because I'd like to stand up for my community, but I find it, I find myself in a predicament that I need to call it.
I do thank you for that, and we do accept your decision to that you have a conflict. So you're quite welcome to leave while we discuss this issue further. Councillor Peltz has now left the chamber, so Councillor Ellis,
thank you, Mr Mayor. It gives me pleasure to put forward this motion, which I declared incorrectly as motion 5 of 2019. It's headed Support for East Gippsland and Gippsland-wide communities affected by the state government's proposal to cease logging of state forests by 2030. Councillors, I propose that Council, 1, writes to the Premier of Victoria, the Honourable Daniel Andrews, requesting that he reconsider his decision to cease all logging of native forests in the state of Victoria by 2030 and provide evidence for the basis of the decision announced on Thursday, the 7th of November 2019. 2, that the state government work with local government, the greater Gippsland community and the timber industry to support and enhance a sustainable native timber industry. 3, that the transition funding be proportionally distributed to the towns, communities and industries that are most likely to be affected by the decision. There's a typographical error there with the exclusion of by in the notes. Councillors, just for your note. 4, if practicable and achievable, and most preferably in the near future, take this matter to the Gippsland Local Government Network, the GLGN, requesting that the GLGN liaise with and partner with the timber industry, other local government authorities, state authorities and the wider Gippsland community to further gauge and interpret the long-term consequences of the Premier's decision on Gippsland's communities, industries and the environment. And that, 5, if able, in doing so will seek to identify and offer solutions to any impediments to the implementation of world's best practices in timber harvesting and native forest environmental protection for the long-term benefit of the Gippsland region. And 6, that the GLGN reports the outcome, that Council requests the GLGN reports the outcome of such works back to Council within a reasonable time frame, being no longer than 12 months. Councillors, you have heard from Mr Squires, and I also now will draw your attention to my rationale, which is based upon a statement made by on behalf of the Mayor as a release, media release to the wider East Gippsland community. The announcement by the Victorian Government on the November the 7th, 2019 regarding the phasing out of timber harvesting by 2030 raises many concerns for East Gippsland communities, businesses and residents. Council would like to recognise that many people in the forestry industry and our small communities will be doing it very tough on hearing the announcement. We have multi-generational harvesting, haulage, sawmilling and service industry families who only know this industry and are heavily invested both emotionally and financially. In recent times, there have been significant financial investment in local timber industry businesses as they prepared for sustainable native timber harvesting to continue. Following an announcement of this magnitude, we need to take stock, deal in facts, and understand the full and true impact of direct and indirect job losses, the scale of economic impact, and the social challenges ahead. Council has a long history of supporting the timber industry and timber communities. Our geographic location, high percentage of public land, and our residents' strong affiliation with their communities, such as timber towns in the High Country, Orbost District and Bairnsdale, make East Gippsland unique. Council will listen and advocate for our communities. The support we will require in the weeks, months and years ahead must be tailored to suit East Gippsland. Though parochial in those words of East Gippsland, the words can be applied to the wider Gippsland, in fact the wider state areas impacted by this most serious declaration by our Premier. Councillors, I commend the motion before you as worthy of support and in fact seek your support in adopting this motion on behalf of the communities of East Gippsland and the wider Gippsland region as a fair and reasonable request of the Premier and reasonable actions to be taken in relation to such an announcement of such magnitude affecting so many people's lives and futures. Councillors, the motion is before you.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Would anyone else like to speak for the motion? Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Firstly, a minor correction. Perhaps Mr CEO may be able to correct me on this, but Councillor Ellis mentioned the Honourable Daniel Andrews. Well, I thought that only applied to members of the Legislative Council, the upper house, and the lower house, which is the Legislative Assembly, don't use that term. That's my understanding of it. And just, it's a very minor thing, I know, but we might as well get this as correct as we can. You may have to look up your Googleizer to find that.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Thanks for the question, Councillor Buckley. We'll can check that quickly, and I'm sure before we get to the end of the discussion, we can ensure that the correct is there. There you go.
Yeah, and
they're very quick.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr Mayor. And it seems obvious to me, being engaged with this sort of thing. That was my first job, was logging in native forest as a swampy, and I've always been very interested in it since I was a young teenager. And it just seems logical to me that it's a renewable resource, and when we cut down trees and they regrow back again, we all know that, but we put them into houses and so forth, that's a type of carbon sequestration anyway. Look at this table here, we've stored a fair bit of, this is a pretty solid table, there's a fair bit of carbon sequestration under your feet, above your feet, Mr Mayor. So anyway, and thanks for your motion, and I strongly support you, Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. If we have any more speakers for? Do we have, is it for?
Yep.
Councillor?
So, Councillor Ellis, when you originally proposed this, I was concerned that it was rather rushed. And I did urge Council to draw breath and to just work out the best strategic way forward. We have got a number of years ahead of us, and so to rush this through today, my initial thought was, Councillor, I would like you just to slow it down so that we can maximise our understanding and whatever happens, maximise the benefit for our community. You can't have a provisional support or otherwise of a motion. So I'm glad that in our rapid discussion you enabled to include the wording around providing evidence in this particular notice of motion, because that's one of the things that is lacking at the moment. that if there is evidence that this is not sustainable, and Gary's brought to the attention that it is sustainable, but clearly the state government has a different opinion. So if they have that opinion, what's the evidence? Where have they gained that opinion? Is it political? Is it otherwise? And I'm glad that we've included that in that point 1. To provide us, tell us the whole story, so that we can gain an understanding of what the thinking is. It's very important, because this is a decision that's caused grief. There's no doubt about it. It's a loss. The people have got disbelief and anger and denial, and possibly depression as a result of this. It's a really significant thing. It's caught everybody off guard. I had no idea of it, and I don't think anybody else did. I think it was quarantined in the Premier's office till the last moment. So I'm glad that we did that, and you were able to include that in there. And so we need that information. We also need to maximise whatever happens, the benefit for our community. And as I've mentioned to councillors, my concern would be that some of those peri-urban areas, have I just knocked the water over? Thank you. That we need to ensure that, as Gary mentioned, that this applies to all logging east of Melbourne. And some of those areas east of Melbourne are particularly sensitive electorates. And we don't want that promised or future even more 120 million transition funding to end up in concentrated areas that are not ours. And that would be my concern. So I'm glad that we've been able to mention that in the point 3. It's important. But the transition funding, whatever it is, we may have no control over this, but we can advocate for our communities. But that transitional funding be distributed equitably to the towns, communities and industries that are most affected. And this will be affected. We're affected right now. So Councillor Ellis, I'm glad that you agreed and allowed that to be included, because it's terribly important that we make that point loud and clear, and we don't end up, as I mentioned, to $118 million going to Yarra Ranges Shire for Powelltown, for example, and $2 million being distributed elsewhere. That would be a disaster. So thank you for allowing that. And councillors, as I said, it was rushed, but we can't have a provisional support. So with those conditions or those inclusions, I think it is important that we seek that clarification at this point.
Thank you, Councillor Reeves, for those important deliberations, and well spoken. Speakers against? Okay. Councillor Roberts, you wish to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and very well spoken, Councillor Ellis and Reeves. You make some very pertinent points, not one of them being incorrect. And whatever occurs in the next 10 years, I urge that the government to make it equitable and to make it as easy for affected communities as possible. But the motion that you've put forward today, Councillor Ellis, put me in a really troubling position, and if I'm to be completely honest, I wish that we didn't have to consider it at all. I was up until the early hours of the morning debating this with myself, and I'm still not entirely confident in my argument. What I'm about to say may be indeed unpopular, and rightly so. However, in short, I think the government's decision is premature. I think this government should be doing more to support plantation hardwood, especially in saw logs, but they haven't done a whole lot. In contrast, I think this announcement is continuing a trend that began over 10 years ago when the government began scaling back native hardwood supply. As we can see with the schools that are already closing around the area, we've got Nurrumbee that's just closed, we've got Tubbut and Goonger's just closed, so we're talking about losing young people. We're talking about the consolidation of all the schools in Orbost. This is already an issue that's affecting our areas, our regional towns and our Shire, regardless of what happens in the next 10 years. This is a reality now. The timber industry makes up a huge part of our history and has made our regional areas what they are today. However, this sad reality is that the timber industry has for many years been in a steep decline and has become less and less financially viable. While I think the government should be doing more to support the industry, I'm also of the belief that long-term goals need to be set. In order to preserve the long-term sustainability of our natural environment, difficult decisions will and have to be made eventually. This is why I cannot support this motion today. All I can do is advocate that the government provide much needed support for the transition of the industry. We need to ensure that the new industry is nurtured, and we need to reinvigorate these now sleepy timber towns and help them flourish into the future. While I recognise and deeply appreciate the intent of Councillor Ellis's motion today, unfortunately I cannot support it.
Thank you, Councillor Roberts. Do we have any more speakers? Well, I think we put this to the vote. Sorry, you've got a reply, sorry. My mistake.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for the standard of discussion and debate in relation to this particular issue. It's not an easy one to deal with. I had my feet in both camps. I do have a concern for the future old growth forests. I have a concern for the welfare of our native timber industry, timber forests and the maintenance of a good balance of flora and fauna. I also balance that with the community's needs, the industry needs, and I know that there has to be a way forward that is considered and equitable, as you referred to, Councillor Roberts, in this matter. One of the reasons I brought it forward today was a matter for council leadership on such matters and prioritising the needs of the different sectors of our community, and to tell people that council does listen to both issues, either be environmental or industry, and that we are here to support and put forward argument where needed. In this case, it is needed. The time frame of 10 years is a very short time, and as Mr Squires reminded me, which I was aware of, the phasing out comes in within 3 years. Thus the reason for some urgency in this, and I accept that we do, there is a 10-year frame stated, but the practice is these things will be coming into place in the next 3 years, because we're effectively talking 2020 now. We're not talking 2019. And if you're running a business, you would have to make investment and capital expenditure decisions coming into the short term. We do it in council now. We have annual, full term 4-year plans and in fact 10-year plans. These are all modern practices in government, and it applies also in industry and in the welfare of community. Councillors, I won't continue any further on that, but just to say this is probably one of the most confronting decisions that I've faced in a decade of being a local representative on council. Thank you. I urge you to support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. Now, we can put this to the vote, so I would ask for all those in favour to raise their hands. All those against? Okay, we have one against is Councillor Roberts. All other councillors voted in favour. Thank you. Now we have Councillor Peltz out of the room. I think if somebody could please ask her to return. Now, we're moving on to our confidential business. Yes, please, Councillor Reeves, if you could do that.
Council will now close the meeting to the public in accordance with the provision of section 89(2)(d) and H of the Local Government Act to consider items 7.1 to 7.3 as these items relate to contractual matters.
Give a second. Seconded, Councillor Ellis. All those in favour? That is unanimous.